Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On a calm street in the Grapevine Hollow neighborhood early on January 1, 2012, the joyous mood gave way to fear and terror. Ashley Fallis, a young mother who had been shot in the head, was being transported in an ambulance to the hospital, her life in shambles. When her parents returned from a brief absence, they were shocked to see paramedics and police encircling the house. Only a few hours before, there had been a lot of happiness and celebration in the house. What had transpired on this particular New Year's Eve? Her husband Tom, who was present in the room when the tragedy occurred, was the only person who could know the answer. However, his account of what happened left more questions than it resolved. Although Ashley's family was certain they knew the truth, investigators had to deal with a lot of inconsistencies and odd information. Nobody could have predicted the depth of the mystery that existed behind those houses' doors. Ashley Fallis, then 28 years old, was shot in the head and taken to the hospital early on January 1, 2012. Ashley's family thought they knew what had happened right away. It was clear to them that her husband Tom was the only possible culprit. When the gunshot was fired, he and Ashley were in the room. Tom was Ashley's family's main suspect because of his short fuse and domineer. For the police, though, the story was less straightforward. A detailed investigation was necessary because contradicting evidence was discovered at the scene. Ashley's past turned out to be as complicated as her present, and witness accounts continued to change. It would be years before fresh information surfaced that would provide a new perspective on what happened that night. The festive evening that started on December 31, 2011, was intended to be peaceful and centered around the family. At their Zinfandel Street residence, Tom and Ashley Fallis threw a New Year's celebration. They celebrated, danced, and drank. Ashley and Tom appeared to be a contented couple. To the delight of their guests, they had been dancing together and gazing affectionately at each other just an hour before. However, as midnight drew near, Ashley made the announcement that she was going outside with her family, which infuriated Tom. Ashley's family was the last group of guests left at the house when the argument broke out. Ashley and her family attempted to defend her, but Tom started shouting at them. Tom demanded that the relatives leave after their attempts at mediation failed. Tom withdrew to the bedroom and slammed the door. The couple was left alone when Ashley's parents also made the decision to move out. Tragic events occurred several hours later. Ashley's family's intrusion into their private lives irritated Tom. Ashley and her parents had been drinking all evening, so he thought it was inappropriate for them to go outside. He insisted Ashley's parents get out. Tension between the couple only increased after they left. The argument resurfaced in the bedroom after the guests had left, leaving Tom and Ashley alone. According to Tom, their argument stemmed from old grievances, but Ashley was adamant that she would live her life as she saw fit, regardless of what he thought. Tom claimed that her family had an influence on her. Tom claimed to have heard Ashley handling the gun stored beneath the mattress while he was getting into his pajamas and standing by the closet. Tom started to ask her what she was doing, but the shot went off before he could finish. On January 1, 2012, early in the morning, emergency personnel arrived on the scene. After Ashley's family made accusations, the police enlisted the help of Colorado Bureau of Investigation investigators. Jenna Fox and Joe Ridden, her parents, blamed Tom for the incident right away, pointing to his hostility and rage earlier that night. Ashley appeared to have committed suicide based on the evidence found at the scene, but investigators found information that cast doubt on the situation. Items strewn all over the floor and crooked picture frames on the walls suggested a potential struggle prior to the gunshot. Unsigned divorce documents discovered on a dresser appeared to support rumors of marital discord. An online dating site had brought Ashley and Tom together in the spring of 2007. Ashley was gregarious and energetic, and Tom fell in love with her right away. Their relationship progressed swiftly, and Ashley already had 2 daughters from a prior marriage. The couple married 2 weeks after the birth of their son, who was born a year after they first met. Ashley's daughters were adopted by Tom in 2010, and the family moved in together. But the family was becoming more tense by the end of 2011. Ashley's youngest son had just turned 3, and their 2 older daughters were 6 and 9 years old. The boy needed multiple surgeries after being diagnosed with hydrocephalus. Ashley, who was finding it difficult to manage her duties as a mother and the challenges in her marriage to Tom, was severely impacted by the stress of his illness. The tragic events of that New Year's Eve were predicated on the tense atmosphere created by these difficulties. Ashley Follis was let go from her job at North Colorado Medical Center in 2010. Aggressive behavior was cited as the official reason, which was insubordination. Despite winning a settlement in her wrongful termination lawsuit, the legal victory did little to address her other issues. She had a brief affair with a high school sweetheart the following year, which made her already shaky marriage to Tom even more strained. At the same time, Ashley went to a psychiatrist for assistance. Since she was having up to 4 or 5 panic attacks a week, she was prescribed medication to lower her anxiety and stabilize her mood. Her relationship with Tom was severely strained as a result of these difficulties. Even though Tom knew about her affair, he decided against filing for divorce. Ashley herself created the divorce documents that investigators later discovered in their bedroom in 2009 when the couple was thinking about divorcing because of their divergent work schedules. But in the end, they made the decision to remain together and improve their relationship. According to Tom, their relationship had begun to improve in the months preceding the tragedy. He had found a stable job as a corrections officer with the Weld County Sheriff's Office. Ashley, meanwhile, discovered her own method of handling life's challenges. She started giving talks at conferences, offering support to other parents facing similar challenges, and sharing her experiences of raising a child with hydrocephalus. Ashley tested positive for pregnancy at home a few weeks prior to New Year's Eve. This was unexpected because she had been sterilized to avoid getting pregnant again after the birth of their youngest child. Ashley thought she might be pregnant in spite of the odds. She stopped taking her mood-stabilizing and anxiety medications to protect the unborn child. However, Ashley started her menstrual cycle just hours before guests arrived on December 31, 2011, the day of the party. She and Tom were devastated when a second pregnancy test revealed a negative result. A conversation about the possibility of trying to conceive another child and undoing the sterilization process had started that day. Years before, Ashley's mother had proposed the procedure, but now they had complete control over the choices. Tom and Ashley both stated that they would like to have another child, so the abrupt change in circumstances caused a great deal of emotional strain. All of this served as the background for what happened that night. Even though the day was emotionally taxing, the party at Ashley and Tom Fallis's house was exciting. Ashley tried her hardest to look happy. She danced, drank, and gave her loved ones hugs. Ashley appeared content and resilient, as she always did, according to her parents Joe and Jenna. It was difficult for them to accept that she would have voluntarily abandoned her family. However, Tom asserted that Ashley's family was unaware of the intense emotional struggles that were concealed behind her apparent composure. Tom's account of what happened that evening was carefully considered by investigators. He started his interview by narrating the events of the day, including how Ashley's decision to go outside with her family members escalated a minor argument and how the negative pregnancy test result had set the tone. Ashley's propensity to follow her mother's advice too frequently became the topic of the argument. Tom stated that he just wanted things to calm down and didn't want to argue anymore. Investigators observed scratches on Tom's neck and chest during his police interview. Given that they might have been signs of a struggle, these marks sparked suspicions. Tom clarified that the red marks were caused by him scratching his skin because he was itching after shaving his chest for the first time. He claimed that stress might have been the cause of the scratches on his neck. As the interview went on, the level of questioning increased. Tom insisted on his innocence because he believed he was being accused of a crime. He insisted that he wasn't in the room when the gun went off and that he didn't shoot Ashley. Investigators were inspecting the house and interviewing neighbors in the meantime. Chelsea Arriga, a neighbor, claimed to have heard Ashley yell, "Get off me," just prior to the gunshot. This story ran counter to what Tom had said. Tom denied that he ever made Ashley do anything against her will when investigators questioned him about the yelling. He clarified that he only requested that she cease following her mother's advice because it was straining their marriage. Investigators pressed him further, pointing out that Ashley was unlikely to have shot herself because of the wound on the back of her head. To prove his innocence, Tom insisted on having his hands tested for gunpowder residue. In order to ascertain whether Ashley was capable of firing the gun, he also demanded that her hands be examined. Because of the peculiar circumstances and contradicting evidence, investigators remained doubtful despite his explanations. Ashley Fawless was in the hospital, where medical professionals battled to save her life, while Tom was at the station. Unfortunately, they declared her dead a few hours after she was admitted. Tom was devastated to hear of her passing. After the incident, he said, he saw her breathing and thought she might have a chance to live when he held her in his arms. Despite not getting a confession from Tom after 3 hours of interrogation, investigators were unable to rule him out as a suspect. Tom grew more and more upset, insisting on his innocence and saying over and over that he could never hurt his wife. Ashley's death was declared a voluntary act 4 days after the incident. The medical examiner came to the conclusion that she killed herself, even though lab tests were not yet finished. Ashley's family was shocked and incredulous when the case was closed. They felt that the investigation was hurried and that Tom's employment in the county's correctional system had given him preferential treatment, which they felt affected the investigation's conclusion. It was challenging to demonstrate that Tom had any ties to the detectives working on the case, though, because of his employment with a different law enforcement organization that was unrelated to the investigation. Almost immediately, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation was called in to guarantee impartiality. However, errors were made. In contrast to standard procedure, Tom was not kept apart from possible witnesses at the scene. Furthermore, he did not cover his hands to protect any gunpowder residue that might have been important evidence. Tom's interrogation was handled poorly, according to Ashley's family, who felt that 3 hours was not enough time for the main person of interest in a case involving a suspicious death. They felt that until Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joe, pressed for it, investigators did not take Tom seriously as a suspect. Detectives changed their strategy only in response to their adamant demands. Even so, the investigation was only cursory. In the end, Tom was free to go. In order to be nearer to his sister, Tom relocated to Indiana after the tragedy, taking the kids with him. He seemed to be attempting to start over when he enrolled in college to obtain a bachelor's degree. Ashley's parents, Joe and Jenna, on the other hand, were uncompromising. They made a plea for justice to the media. They stressed that Ashley loved life and would never have voluntarily ended it, and they talked about Tom's short fuse in interviews. Nick Glover, a 17-year-old neighbor of the Fawless family, was a crucial new witness who was discovered by reporter Justin Joseph. Nick disclosed that he witnessed emergency vehicles pull up to the Fawless residence on January 1, 2012, while he was at home with friends. Additionally, Nick stated that he told Detective Michael Yates in an interview that he had heard Tom tell Ashley's parents, "I shot my wife." However, the police reports did not include a record of his statement. New accusations against law enforcement were sparked by the lack of documentation, which suggested potential corruption and a cover-up. Detective Yates was suspected of purposefully ignoring this crucial testimony in order to keep Tom safe. The Evans Police Department reopened the case in April 2014, over 2 years after Ashley's passing. According to new accusations, Yates had changed a witness's testimony and left out important evidence to bolster the story that Ashley had committed suicide. The investigation was carried out fairly, according to law enforcement officials, who denied any favoritism. Tom Fawless was taken into custody close to his Indiana home on November 18, 2014. He insisted on his innocence even after being accused of second-degree manslaughter. Many questions remained about the case, which had received a lot of public attention because of Justin Joseph's investigation. Ashley's leg bruises, for instance, raised questions about a flashlight that was discovered at the scene and possibly used during a fight. It was eventually discovered, however, that the flashlight was not connected to the crime and had belonged to an officer who had tried to administer first aid. According to the prosecution, Ashley kept a Taurus 9mm handgun under the mattress, which Tom took during a confrontation, put to her head, and then fired. After that, he called emergency services and lowered her body to the ground. Jenna Fox, Ashley's mother, testified during the trial that Tom had used harsh language and behaved aggressively during the New Year's Eve party, resulting in a fight. Tom refuted these claims. Jenna revealed later in the trial that there was a family history of mental health problems. Both Ashley's uncle and grandmother had committed suicide. This evidence was used by the prosecution to bolster their hypothesis that Ashley might have taken her own life voluntarily. Ashley's psychiatrist, however, stated in her testimony that she did not exhibit any symptoms of depression as of December 2011. Ashley was receiving overlapping prescriptions as a result of seeing 2 psychiatrists and a therapist concurrently, according to information later presented by the defense. Testimonies from forensic experts regarding the crime scene were inconsistent. Tom couldn't have shot his wife, according to Dan Gilliam, who had devoted hundreds of hours to examining the evidence. People who fire weapons in a fit of rage seldom stop after a single shot, Gilliam said. Gilliam was called as a witness by the prosecution, despite his findings. Jonathan Priest, another expert, visited the crime scene and went over the case materials. He deduced that Ashley had been in close proximity to Tom at the time of the shot. There would have been more blood all over the room, Priest thought, if Tom had been farther away. The chronology of when Tom arrived at Ashley and started helping, as recorded by the first responders, served as the basis for his analysis. This argument was used by the prosecution to refute the defense's assertions. Ashley's failed attempts to conceive, according to the prosecution, added to her emotional problems. Although she was not pregnant at the time of her death, an autopsy showed that she might have become pregnant following a tubal ligation. Ashley's emotional distress was exacerbated by reports that she thought she was pregnant 3 times in the 9 months before she passed away. The trial psychiatrists emphasized how these conditions could have had a substantial effect on her mental health. A key component of the prosecution's case, particularly after Nick's friend Chelsea Origo provided her own account, was Nick Glover's testimony that he overheard Tom tell his parents, "I shot my wife," the night Ashley Fallis died. Chelsea also reportedly heard Ashley yelling, "Get off me!" according to Nick's mother, Kathy. However, Chelsea said during the trial that she was too drunk to remember the argument distinctly. Nick, however, emphasized that such a confession was unforgettable and insisted that he remembered everything that happened that night. Investigators took notice of his claims, and Detective Michael Yates, who had spoken with Nick the day Ashley died, was subject to internal review for neglecting to record this purported confession. Yates insisted that Nick had never said such a thing to him, but the investigation revealed no wrongdoing on his part. Defense lawyers pointed out various contradictions in Nick Glover's testimony during his cross-examination. They noted that Nick kept up a cordial relationship with Tom following his purported confession, taking part in family events like Christmas celebrations and camping excursions. Nick gave the same response more than 90 times when asked why he behaved in this manner. "I don't remember." Chris Graves, a former deputy for the Weld County Sheriff's Office, later came forward and said he had heard Tom confess. The defense cited contradictions in Graves's story, claiming that when he arrived at the scene he heard Tom yelling, "I can't believe I shot her, I can't believe she's dead," despite the fact that the crime scene was packed with neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers. Nobody else claimed to have heard Tom's alleged outburst. Additionally, Graves did not arrest Tom on the spot, stating that it was outside of his authority. The defense also pointed out that for 3 years after the incident, Chris Graves had not submitted any reports regarding his statements. His credibility was further damaged when he was later fired for dishonesty from the sheriff's office. These elements call into question the prosecution's story. The prosecution's theory was also not supported by a large number of tangible pieces of evidence. Tests for gunshot residue on Ashley's 2 hands revealed residue, but tests on Tom's hands revealed no traces. Neither nail scrapings from Ashley nor scratches on Tom's chest, which could have been signs of a struggle, contained any evidence of Ashley's DNA. The idea that the couple had a physical altercation prior to the shot being fired was seriously called into question by these findings. In his own defense, Tom Fallis declined to testify. Over 40 witnesses were called to testify during the trial, which lasted for several weeks. Ashley's mental health and the major obstacles she had encountered in the months before her death, repeated pregnancy tests, her son's illness, prescription drugs, losing her job, and having an affair, were the main topics of the defense's closing arguments. The defense argues that these elements may have played a role in the tragedy. Ashley's purported farewell letters were introduced during the trial, which was a startling development. She wrote that she could no longer live, called herself a failure, and apologized to Tom in these letters. Since they were only made aware of these letters years after Ashley's passing, her family questioned their veracity. According to her family, they thought the letters were fake, and had never seen any indication that Ashley might have written them. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours, including an hour for lunch, before rendering its decision. Tom Fallis was acquitted of all charges, including second-degree manslaughter. Ashley's family was devastated by the decision. Jenna Fox and Joe Ridden, her parents, were adamant about Tom's guilt and sued the Evans Police Department, alleging that investigators had fabricated or hidden evidence. They contended that other officers who may have heard Tom's purported confession stayed silent and that Nick Glover's 2012 testimony had been disregarded. In the end, their cases were dropped. Ashley's family remained adamant about Tom's guilt and insisted on accepting the acquittal. Nevertheless, they were able to keep up a relationship with the kids and obtain visitation rights that let them continue to be active in their lives. As he works to rebuild his life and further his education, Tom Fallis is still struggling financially as a result of legal fees. Tom continued to look after the children after the tragedy. To start over and be nearer to his sister, he relocated them to a different state. He informed them that their mother had died in an accident, but he would like to give them more information when they are older. The case is still cloaked in mystery despite every attempt to find the truth. Doubt seems to grow with each response, and questions persist. Ashley Fallis's story is one of those instances where it becomes difficult to distinguish between truth and deceit, leaving only suspicion and unsolved mysteries in its wake. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. A young woman disappeared as though she had just melted into thin air. She didn't come home one morning even though everything around her appeared to be completely normal. There were no signs or calls, just a harrowing quiet and a deluge of unsolved questions. What might have transpired during those brief hours? By whom was she last sighted? Everyone who knew her was shaken by her disappearance, which signaled the start of a sinister and twisted tale filled with secrets and suspicions that turned into a nightmare beyond anyone's wildest expectations. An important turning point in Asolepayeva's life occurred in April 2021. She had long wished for a better life, one that was full of chances to live more comfortably with her loved ones. Then, like a beacon of light, an offer materialized. It came from her cousin's husband, Murat Mayerbekov. She had known Murat for years, and he was a car salesman in Georgia. Abruptly, he extended his hand and said he needed an assistant immediately. He told Aysel that the work, which would involve assisting with paperwork and managing car transfers for clients from Kazakhstan, would be simple and even exciting. It seemed to Aysel like a gift from fate, an unanticipated chance. Murat went into great detail about her duties, which would include managing the car sales process, setting up meetings, and preparing paperwork for clients. He clarified that Georgia's auto industry was flourishing and that there was a strong demand for used cars, particularly from Kazakhs searching for less expensive models. Additionally, he said that his staff was amiable and prepared to assist Aysel in settling in and feeling comfortable. The offer appeared to her as a long overdue reprieve from her cycle of constraints and issues. Everything seemed ideal: a $500 monthly salary, paid housing, and a flexible schedule. Aysel's prospects had never been so bright, and she thought her dreams might finally come true. She felt hopeful for a better future and financial independence when she considered working overseas. She had plans to support her parents in their later years, save money for her own apartment, and put money aside for them. She felt strong and confident that she was making the right decision because of these hopes. Aysel was raised in Kaban-Bay Betir, a small village encircled by endless, vast steppes in the Akmola region of Kazakhstan. She lived here for the majority of her life, seeing many of her classmates go through the normal village routines of getting married young, working on nearby farms, or finding employment in agricultural businesses. There were few options in the village, and opportunities were frequently reduced to a daily struggle for survival. Aysel, however, had higher hopes. The lure of large cities, the possibility of altering her fate, and the aspiration to accomplish more all enthralled her. In search of her identity, Aysel relocated to Nur Sultan after high school. There she found work as a fitness club receptionist and lived with her older sister, who helped her through difficult times. Although working as a receptionist gave her a reliable source of income, the salary was low, and she was still unable to realize her dream of owning her own apartment. She cut back on little things and saved every extra tennet she could, all the while clinging to the hope that one day she would have her own place, where she could make a comfortable home and experience the independence she so desperately desired. Asel thought she could improve her family's situation in addition to changing her own destiny. Since her parents had put in so much effort to raise her and make sure she had everything she needed, she wanted to return the favor. However, reality showed her that her dreams were still a long way off, month after month. She was aware that it would be extremely difficult to achieve the degree of financial security required to support herself and her loved ones back home. Although it provided some stability, her job at the fitness club did not provide any of the opportunities she so desperately wanted. Then her cousin's husband, Murat Merbekov, offered her a job in Georgia. For Asel, this appeared to be the opportunity she had been seeking. It was well known that Murat knew business, and he talked confidently about the opportunities he could present. He clarified that he handled car sales in Georgia, serving Kazakhstani buyers seeking more reasonably priced cars, and that he needed an assistant to assist with paperwork and client relations. The offer wasn't taken lightly by Asel. She discussed it extensively with her older sister, who was first apprehensive and gave it careful thought while assessing the dangers. Her sister was concerned about Asel traveling to a foreign nation, far from home, and being in the company of strangers. Nonetheless, Murat persuaded them that Georgia was secure, that he would personally protect her, and that the position might be a fantastic first step toward a better future. Asel was aware of the dangers, but her determination to make a difference in her life overcame her uncertainties and anxieties. She kept thinking that this might be her only chance to escape the constraints of her current circumstance. Although she was aware that it wouldn't be simple, she had faith in her ability to overcome any obstacles. Despite all of her uncertainties and fears, Asel decided to accept the offer because she was sure that it was her opportunity to change her future. This was her chance to escape her routine, and she was going to take advantage of it. Despite their limited financial resources, Asel was supported by her family. Despite leading modest lives themselves, her parents and sister supported her emotionally and shared her aspirations. Asel had no idea at the time that this chance would trigger a series of unanticipated circumstances that would fundamentally alter everything. Eager and hopeful, Asel took a plane to Georgia shortly after. She felt that this move marked the start of an exciting new chapter in her life. When she got there, she moved into Murat Mirbekov's apartment in Rustavi. Murat assured her that although the apartment was small and had some older furniture, it was only meant to be a temporary place for her to stay until she found a better place to live. Asel initially communicated with her family on a regular basis, sharing her experiences in her new life. She talked excitedly about the local food she was sampling and praised the city's historic streets and distinctive architecture. She enjoyed even the small things, such as strolling through Rustavi in the evening. Everything appeared so novel and fascinating. She sounded content and assured in her choice, and her voice exuded real excitement. Her mother could hear the joy in her voice whenever she called home. Asel talked positively about the local traditions and the friendly, hospitable people she encountered. But after a few weeks, things began to shift. Asel started making fewer calls, and her chats became more circumspect and brief. Her voice carried undertones of fatigue and occasionally a trace of concern. Something seemed to be hidden from her. Asel gave evasive responses when her mother inquired about her health, typically attributing her weariness to her job. Her words sounded less convincing than before, but she insisted that everything was okay. Her mother became more anxious and made more attempts to contact her daughter, but many calls were not returned. Her family's concerns increased as each conversation became more reticent and brief. Asel's mother was able to contact her via video call one day. She waited tensely for her daughter's face to appear on the screen. The screen showed a room she didn't recognize in place of the familiar scene. The room looked cluttered and uncomfortable. There were strewn about belongings and furniture that appeared to have been hurriedly moved, as though someone had left in a hurry or didn't care to keep things neat. Her mother was alarmed and inquired as to what was happening and why the room appeared that way. Asel dismissed it with excuses about being busy without providing a clear explanation. She said she had a lot of work to do and abruptly ended the call. With every unanswered question and every fleeting, evasive exchange, her mother's anxiety only grew more intense. A passerby in Tbilisi's Didi Digomi neighborhood discovered the lifeless body of a young woman beneath a high-rise building's windows on the morning of May 16. At first, nobody knew her name, and she was only dressed in a t-shirt. Investigators would soon identify her as Asıl Aytbayeva, however. One of the most important pieces of evidence in the case would be her last words, which she recorded and sent to her best friend. Several attempts to reach Asıl had been unsuccessful in the hours before that tragic event. When Asıl left a voicemail for her friend late on May 5, the anxiety grew. A man's voice could be heard on the recording berating Asıl and accusing her of taking advantage of him. He identified himself as Beso. Anger dominated his voice as he threatened Asıl, accusing her of betraying him and demanding that she pay the price. A feeling of dread overcame Asıl's friend as she heard the message. She was terrified for her friend's safety and realized that things were becoming dangerously out of control. Asıl disclosed in the same message that she was shaken and scared after Beso had turned to physical violence. She talked about feeling stuck, having nowhere to go, and not knowing where to look for assistance. The friend tried calling her back right away, but the calls kept dropping, and Asıl didn't answer, which only made her anxiety worse. Asıl's distant relative Murat Mirbekov, who had enticed her to Georgia with the promise of employment, was the subject of growing suspicion. Later, investigators would discover that Mirbekov had exploited Asıl's precarious position by brutally mistreating her twice and betraying her confidence. He took advantage of the fact that she had no support system and was alone in a foreign country. He then gave her to a man named Beso, either as a promise of payment or in return for a car. Asıl was left stranded, essentially trapped, with new threats every day. She felt she couldn't approach the authorities because she was afraid they wouldn't believe her, or that telling them about the situation would make it worse. Any potential escape seemed unattainable due to the overwhelming sense of helplessness and isolation. The intensity of Asıl's fear for her life was made clear in her last chat with her friend. Her voice was filled with fear and desperation, and she was clueless about how she would ever escape this predicament. Although her friend wanted to help, he was unable to act quickly enough. Asıl's body was found beneath the windows of that tall building on the morning of May 6. Georgian authorities confirmed the identity of the man involved in the tragic case of Asıl Aytbayeva. He was Besik Tordua, a 57-year-old Georgian with a troubled past who was known in criminal circles as Beso. He had a history of aggressive behavior and had previously served a 10-year sentence for auto theft. Beso had already left Tbilisi and was making his way toward the border in an attempt to avoid capture by the time news of Asıl's death reached the public. But the police moved quickly, and he was captured in a day. In the meantime, the man who had invited Asıl to Georgia, Murat Mirbekov, returned to Nur Sultan as soon as he learned of her death, apparently in an attempt to avoid any repercussions. As they attempted to piece together the circumstances surrounding Asıl's premature death, her family, friends, and the authorities were left in a state of uncertainty. Asıl had contacted a friend a few days prior to the tragedy, requesting a loan of 1,000,000 tenge, roughly $220, to pay for travel expenses. She probably didn't want to worry her family, so she didn't call them, but in the end, her independence backfired. The fact that her friend was unable to help because of financial concerns among her loved ones. Her family vehemently disagreed with the Georgian police's initial assumption that Asıl had purposefully leaped from the window. They were aware of Asıl as a vibrant, upbeat young lady who was planning her future. She had thought that the Georgia job opportunity would help her get better off financially and get closer to her goal of owning her own apartment. To the police, the conclusion seemed unimaginable. The injuries on Asıl's body that didn't fit the description of a normal fall from a great height particularly worried her mother. Asıl's mother noticed some unsettling details as soon as her body was returned to Kazakhstan. Her arms and legs were unharmed, and she did not have any of the common fractures that happen after a fall. Oddly, she was holding her arms across her chest, which is not the proper position in these situations. Additionally, her head was free of the typical trauma associated with falls from high altitudes. The internal injuries, which included a ruptured spleen and other organ damage, were even more worrisome as they raised the possibility of serious abuse. Her body also had several burns that resembled cigarette marks before she died, and some of her teeth had been knocked out, which raised the horrifying possibility that she had been tortured. The family's suspicion that Asel had been abused in her last hours was only strengthened by these disturbing findings. Her mother was shocked that her daughter would act in such a drastic manner. When her body was returned home, the disturbing details that surfaced only raised more unsettling questions, none of which seemed to have definitive answers. According to an examination, Asel had been mistreated prior to her passing. In an effort to create the impression that Asel had committed suicide, her mother insisted that her body had been placed beneath the high-rise's windows after she had already passed away. The Georgian police did not carry out any additional investigations and refused to admit any criminal involvement in Asel's death, in spite of these alarming facts. While in detention, Besik Tordua, popularly known as Beso, first refused to cooperate. He acknowledged that there had been physical contact, but insisted it was consensual after investigators disclosed that evidence verified an intimate encounter with Asel prior to her passing. Besik Tordua claims that it all began on April 30, 2021, when he learned that Asel had been severely abused twice by her captor, Murat Mirbegov, who had brought her to Georgia. Beso said he was furious and made the decision to discipline Mirbekov. He claimed that after confronting and physically abusing Mirbekov, he threatened to make sure he left the nation and avoided Asel. Beso Tordua allegedly offered Asel a room at his house after this and pledged to keep her safe. He asserted that Asel spent a number of days with him and that he made an effort to look after her, assisting her in overcoming the trauma. He maintained that they developed a mutual sense of trust and that any intimacy they had was voluntary. According to Besik Tordua, Asel left her alone in the living room to take a shower the night before he passed away. She was gone when he got back. Azel's body was on the ground below, beyond a fence, when Beso found the balcony door open and looked down. Panic struck. Given his connection to Asel and his criminal history, he was afraid that he would be held accountable for what had transpired. According to Besik Tordua, he ran downstairs and got close to the fence but lacked the bravery to scale it. He claimed that after standing there for a short while in terror, he ran from the scene because he was afraid of being blamed for her death. He acknowledged that in order to avoid any possible consequences, he then made the decision to leave the city. Besik Tordua died in a prison hospital in July 2021. Although a heart attack was listed as the official cause of death, Asel's mother maintained that he had been beaten. His death may have been staged to keep him from going to trial, the family suspected. Besik Tordua had been facing a possible sentence of 8 to 12 years for his offenses when this occurred, and the legal proceedings were still in progress. After examining a voicemail Asel had left to her friend just before she passed away, investigators began to doubt his account before he passed away. Asel expressed fear of Beso and mentioned threats from him in the recording. Any assertions of a consensual relationship are called into question by references to aggressive behavior. One aspect of the case that attracted a lot of attention was the suspicion held by authorities that Besik Tordua may have coerced Asel. He was never officially accused of being the cause of her death, though. Although his actions might have pushed her to act in a desperate manner, the official position remained that there was insufficient evidence to pursue additional charges. The lawyer in Asel's family had a different opinion. They believed that she had been murdered and that the death was staged to make it look as if she had committed suicide. The injuries discovered on her body and the circumstances surrounding her fall, which didn't match the usual outcome of a leap from that height, confirmed this theory. When Murat Mirbekov returned to Kazakhstan, he was captured. He was accused of both human trafficking and aggravated assault. Asel's parents petitioned to have him extradited to Georgia for trial because they thought he was directly responsible for her death. Local authorities, however, took a while to address their requests or look into the matter further. Things didn't start to change until Asel's mother's morgue photos were uploaded online. The prosecutor's office took the issue more seriously after the pictures sparked public outrage. Journalists and the general public both took notice of Asel's untimely death and began their own online investigations. Details started to surface, some of them unverified. On the night of the tragedy, witnesses reported seeing two men allegedly push Asel off the balcony. Police stated that they had not discovered any evidence to support the rumors that the incident was captured on video. Asel reported Murat Mirbekov's violent actions to the local authorities after arriving in Georgia in order to obtain protection, but her requests were ignored. When Georgian journalists started looking into the case themselves, it became clear that the police had done nothing. One of Asel's acquaintances in Tbilisi consented to testify amid the events that were taking place. He revealed that Asel had sent him a desperate message the day before the tragedy. She mentioned Mirabekov in her message, claiming that he had attacked her twice. She talked about the intense psychological anguish she was experiencing in addition to the physical pain. She had requested assistance, but was hesitant to demand it because she still believed she could manage things independently. Being stranded in a foreign nation without any support system made Asel feel trapped. She tried to remain strong despite her fear of Mirbekov, she confided in her acquaintance. Despite her persistent belief that she could find a way out, she frequently talked about feeling as though she was in a hopeless situation. The inquiry also turned up other information. In addition to offering Asel a job in Georgia, Mirbekov had made similar promises to other young Kazakh women. He had promised them good jobs, good wages, and good housing. Luckily, none of them had agreed to his terms. Some had found his messages, which emphasized the ostensibly exceptional opportunities he could offer, to be especially persistent. All the women, however, had refused. Later, their families thanked them profusely for their foresight, saying it had prevented them from being in danger. The case took a dramatic turn by the end of July 2022-208. After more investigation, Georgian forensic experts found Mirbekov's DNA traces on Asel's clothing, which is a crucial piece of evidence. This bolstered the prosecution's case in court and validated witness statements. Ultimately, the work of investigative journalists and the new evidence obtained through forensic analysis started to provide a more comprehensive picture of what Asel had gone through in her last days. The truth was slowly emerging, in spite of all the barriers. One of the most talked about occasions in Kazakhstan was Murat Mirbekov's trial in Nur-Sultan. The case gained even more public attention when Georgian investigators, who were invited to the proceedings, presented the evidence and conclusions they had gathered. The tension in the courtroom was evident when Mirbekov showed up. He insisted he had nothing to do with Asel's death or any violent actions toward her, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. He maintained that he was innocent and that he had been falsely accused. Those in attendance were left perplexed and incensed by his cold-blooded attitude and total lack of regret. Given the seriousness of the situation, Mirbekov's aging parents made the decision to apologize to Asel's distraught family. They hoped that their gesture would provide the victim's loved ones with some small solace. Mirbekov, however, continued to deny any wrongdoing and showed no interest in any attempts at reconciliation. The prosecutor made a resolute and firm statement. He offered a story that implied Mirbekov had given Asel to him for his own benefit, in an effort to improve relations with a strong Georgian man named Bashik Tordua. The prosecutor stressed that Mirbekov knew he was seriously endangering Asel and was well aware of Bashik Tordua's violent tendencies and criminal history. Tordua was infamous. He was so feared by the locals that they avoided him at all costs. According to the prosecutor, Asel was under constant pressure, and her desperate attempts to flee an intolerable circumstance resulted in the horrific events that ultimately led to her tragic demise. She had been pushed to the limit, feeling hopeless and in great distress, with no way out. Mirbekov was already a father of two, and his wife was expecting their third child. It was disclosed during the trial. Having a family should have deterred him from committing crimes, the court suggested, taking these circumstances into account as mitigating factors. Witness statements and the evidence, however, made it abundantly evident that he was involved in grave crimes in spite of these specifics. It became clear that his role as a father and his obligations to his family had not prevented him from acting cruelly. The court's final decision was rendered on August 2, 2022. Mirbekov was convicted of both acts of aggression and human trafficking. He received a 15-year sentence in a maximum security facility. The court also mandated that Mirbekov compensate Asel's parents for the emotional harm they had suffered by giving them 5 million tenge, or about $10,500. Although no monetary settlement could ever fully compensate her family for the loss of their daughter, this sum served as a symbolic recognition of the anguish and suffering they had to endure. Asel's family was not happy with the outcome, even after the verdict and the compensation. They were convinced that Asel had been the victim of a premeditated crime and that the case was far from over. Her loved ones were certain that she had been killed on purpose, in addition to being severely abused and exploited. The court proceedings did not allay the family's concerns or offer genuine closure, even after the trial was over and a guilty verdict and compensation were given. They persisted in believing that Asel's case merited more research and that the whole truth had not yet been revealed. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Perhaps the most vulnerable time in a person's life is during their adolescence. It's a period of time when people are neither children nor fully grown adults. Even though they are still innocent and carefree, they frequently keep secrets, sometimes out of embarrassment or fear. Tragic events can occasionally result from an inability to communicate those difficulties to a loved one or trusted parent. Florida has been rocked by the case of Justice Garrett, whose life was tragically cut short in 2018 at the age of 16. Her mother's realization that she had failed to recognize or comprehend the nightmare her daughter had been living through was heartbreaking. Justice's story revolves around a horrible secret she kept out of fear of being judged, which ultimately resulted in an unthinkable tragedy that took her life. Born on March 19, 2002, Justice Mary Garrett was the oldest of two daughters born to Danielle and Sebastian Garrett. She grew up with Jeanette, her younger sister, who was 10 years her junior. The majority of Justice's early years and adolescence were spent in the tiny Florida town of New Smyrna Beach, which is situated in Volusia County. The sisters remained with their mother after Justice's parents divorced in 2016. After meeting Robert Kern approximately a year later, Danielle quickly started dating him. By the fall of 2017, Danielle and her two daughters had relocated to Robert's house in the little rural town of Sorrento, Florida, which has a population of just over 1,000. Justice had the most trouble adjusting to the new surroundings and the relocation. She missed her close friends who were still in New Smyrna Beach to start. Second, she had to change schools in the middle of the school year while she was a high school student. Third, she disliked both her mother's partner and her new home. Despite her frustrations, Justice acted politely and made an effort to avoid causing trouble. Justice made friends at her new school right away because of her outgoing, gregarious, and humorous personality. A classmate named Rochelle became particularly close to her, and the two were essentially inseparable. The girls even listed each other as sisters on social media, and Justice often stayed over at Rochelle's house. Justice missed the school bus on Friday, April 13, 2018, because he slept in too late. She didn't have time for breakfast that day because she was rushing to get ready for class. Her mother intended to take Jeanette to the hospital, but her younger sister stayed at home because she was feeling ill. Since school was just a few stops away, Justice chose to ride the public bus there. After packing her backpack and bidding her mother farewell, she departed from the house. Justice was last seen alive at that point. Danielle wasn't worried when Justice didn't arrive home from school on time. She figured her daughter, who frequently went to Rochelle's house after class, had done so. By nightfall, Danielle assumed Justice had made the decision to spend the night at her friend's house, as she had been doing often. She wasn't immediately alarmed by the fact that Justice's phone was off. On Saturday morning, though, Rochelle called Danielle and anxiously inquired as to Justice's well-being. With a shiver running down her spine, Danielle questioned in a shaky voice whether Justice hadn't spent the night at Rochelle's house. She was shocked by the answer. Since Thursday, Rochelle disclosed, she had not seen Justice. Justice's phone had been off for almost 2 days, and she hadn't arrived at school on Friday. Danielle went into a panic. She hurried to the local police station and reported her daughter missing after multiple unsuccessful attempts to get in touch with her. The hunt for Justice started right away. Officers initially thought Justice might have returned to her hometown for a weekend visit with friends, after learning that she had only been in the area 6 months prior. Authorities believed she would reappear soon, because teenagers of that age frequently leave home on their own initiative. whether in protest or for other reasons. Danielle, however, was adamant that her daughter would never do anything like that without telling her. Finding out Justice's social circle and whether she had a boyfriend, had been in a recent argument, or had any other information that could help piece together what happened the day she was last seen was the first step. All of Justice's possessions were still at home, and she had not taken any cash. Shortly after she left for school, her phone stopped working. She hadn't returned any calls or messages, and her social media accounts hadn't been active since late Thursday night. She hadn't gotten in touch with anyone, so none of her friends knew where she might be. Justice didn't experiment with illegal substances or drink alcohol, according to her close friends and family. She had never engaged in serious romantic commitments and was not in a relationship. Justice had never broken the law, had no enemies, and had no conflicts with other people. Her peers viewed her as sweet, kind, and compassionate, and her teachers at school gave her positive reviews. Police promptly reviewed all local traffic accidents, incidents, and crime reports in the region. One possibility they entertained was that she had been in an accident and was unable to speak. She was not, however, listed as having participated in any such incidents. Investigators were able to follow her movements on the morning of her disappearance by using information from her phone. Justice left her house at 7:30 a.m. and started to walk in the direction of the school. After about 15 minutes, she started acting strangely. After a brief pause, she made a sudden direction change. Her phone was switched off shortly after. The small, sleepy town was filled with rumors and conjecture after Justice vanished. Any incident became the focus of attention in a community where nothing ever happened. It was quickly spread by gossip and frequently embellished with lies. Some residents found amusement in spreading rumors, and they saw no harm in doing so. Many of Justice's classmates and friends sincerely wanted to assist with the investigation, but others saw it as a chance to attract attention, increase their own significance, or even experience a brief moment of fame. A number of people reported seeing Justice Garrett in various locations around town. According to some, she entered an enigmatic black vehicle with tinted windows. Some speculated that she had been recruited into a religious sect, while others suggested she was out on the street with a group of teenagers who didn't fit in. Investigators found it challenging to distinguish fact from fiction because these rumors appeared out of nowhere. Consequently, all information, no matter how unlikely, had to be carefully verified. A girl who was one grade up from Justice stood out for her actions. She claimed that the teenager had fled with a secret boyfriend and was expecting his child, and she created a whole blog devoted to Justice's disappearance. By spreading sensationalized and completely made-up stories, the girl was merely trying to gain popularity and attention at school. She was temporarily suspended from school while the investigation was underway as a result of her actions, which resulted in disciplinary actions. Her social media accounts were also deleted for disseminating misleading information. 4 days after Justice vanished, on April 17, a man called the police with a terrifying message. He claimed to have discovered something unsettling in a forested area outside of DeLand. An enthusiastic runner, the man frequently jogged along a remote path that wound through a park and into the woods. As he made his way farther into the woods that morning, he detected a potent, disagreeable stench of decay. He initially believed it to be a dead animal's carcass and considered reporting it to the proper authorities so that it could be taken out. But his curiosity overcame him, and he made the decision to look into the odor's origin on his own. The runner left the trail and ventured into the brush for roughly 15 feet. He saw a horrifying scene there, a severely decomposed human body that was completely deformed. It looked like a young woman, judging by the long hair and traces of clothing. To make sure he didn't unintentionally disturb any possible evidence, the man waited on the trail and called the police right away. Officers thoroughly examined the scene and the remains after they arrived. It became evident that a violent crime had been committed here, and the victim was, in fact, a very young woman. The fact that her clothes were ripped and her underwear was gone suggests that the crime was probably violent and intimate in nature. The legs bore obvious bite marks, probably from untamed animals, but a corrosive chemical had done the most serious damage. The girl's face had been eroded to the bone by this substance, which had also been poured over her intimate areas, lower abdomen and chest. It was evident that the offender had tried to remove any traces of DNA in addition to disfiguring the victim. A strategy that, as it turned out, worked. Investigators suspected right away that the girl who had vanished days earlier was the owner of the body discovered in the woods. However, DNA testing was necessary for confirmation because of the extensive chemical damage and decomposition. Sadly, the worst fears of the Garrett family came true. Justice had been discovered dead. About 30 minutes' drive from the town where she resided, her remains were found. Her nose, cheekbone, and several ribs were broken, which was evidence that she had been severely beaten prior to the crime. The precise cause of death was assumed to be mechanical asphyxiation due to the advanced state of decomposition, which made it impossible to determine with certainty. During his police interview, the man who found the remains gave important information. "I often ran along the same trail every other day," he explained. He had seen a suspicious-looking man come out of the woods close to the location where Justice's remains were later discovered 2 days prior to discovering the body. Since the witness had only seen the man for a brief moment from behind and a considerable distance away, he was unable to give a detailed description of him. According to his description, the person was a short, stocky white man wearing jeans and a black hoodie. When the man realized he was not alone, he hurried out of sight and vanished behind the trees. The runner didn't give the encounter much thought at the time, but he thought it was strange. That day there was no discernible smell of decay, and he pushed the encounter from his thoughts. But 2 days later, when he found the remains, he remembered the odd man on the trail and told the police about it. Detectives suspected the stranger in the woods might be the criminal who committed the crime right away. He might have gone back to hide his tracks and obliterate the evidence. Experts concluded that chlorine bleach was the corrosive agent used on the body. The remains became unidentifiable due to the rapid decomposition caused by the chemical and the humid climate of the area. However, after passing a polygraph and offering a strong alibi for the day Justice vanished, the jogger was excluded as a suspect. Justice's mother claims that her daughter had intended to ride the public bus to school that morning, but according to street cam surveillance footage, Justice never went to the bus stop. The mystery was further complicated when a neighbor claimed to have seen Justice get into her stepfather Robert's vehicle. Detectives now had to question the teen's parents again to find out why they hadn't told the truth, which fundamentally altered the course of the investigation. Danielle confessed right away, stating that Robert Kern, her partner, had recently had his driver's license temporarily revoked, but he agreed to give her a ride because her daughter was running late that morning. In order to keep Robert from getting upset, Danielle had kept this information from him. She thought Justice was still alive and would soon be going home at the time of the first interview. To confirm the stepfather's account, detectives immediately asked for footage from security cameras close to the school. But according to the recordings, Robert had not dropped Justice off at school or any other location. There were no cameras on his car on the way to the school. Where had they gone then? It was evident from this new information that Robert was probably the last person to see Justice alive. Robert acknowledged driving Justice that morning in spite of having his license suspended when he was questioned again. He claimed that Justice had pleaded with him to take her to DeLand, a nearby town, rather than to school, where she was allegedly scheduled to meet with a covert boyfriend. Robert said he had originally refused to take her there because he didn't know the name of the person she was meeting, but in an attempt to mend their tense relationship, he finally acceded to her requests. He allegedly promised Justice that he would not tell her mother about this outing. She told him that she would come back alone later in the day and that since it was Friday, she would spend the night at a friend's house. Robert concurred because he saw nothing out of the ordinary or worrisome about the circumstances. A potential secret boyfriend was added to the case as a result of this discovery. Investigators had to find him and identify him quickly. He might have been the last person to see Justice alive, or he might have been involved in her disappearance. Law enforcement chose to look through Justice's contacts and social media activity as the first step in the search. Detectives confiscated her laptop because her phone had not been found, and what they found led to further inquiries. Justice regularly engaged with her online and real-life friends through her numerous accounts on different social media sites, but there was no sign of a boyfriend or romantic conversations. However, one account caught our attention as being especially odd and dubious. Investigators soon turned their attention to this profile in an attempt to identify its owner and any possible link to Justice's disappearance. In recent months, Justice Garrett had been the object of unusual interest from a young man named Kevin. He liked her posts, commented on her pictures, and messaged her every day. But Justice didn't appear to care. She didn't want to stay in touch, hardly ever responded to him, and frequently ignored his messages. Later, Justice's friends confirmed that she had spoken of a devoted fan who messaged her on social media all the time, but she didn't find him flattering. Instead, she found him annoying. According to his profile, Kevin lived in the same town as Justice and seemed to be 2 years older. Only a few pictures of a young, athletic man were included on his page, but Justice's family and friends had never laid eyes on him. The photos had been stolen from the internet, and the account was soon found to be fraudulent. Experts swiftly gained access to the account and tracked down the information that led to its creation. The inquiry showed that the account was linked to an adult man, Robert Kern, Justice's stepfather, rather than an adolescent. Robert was summoned back for interrogation. Investigators questioned him about why he hadn't told them sooner and why he had made a phony account to communicate with his stepdaughter. Although he seemed taken aback that investigators had discovered his involvement with the account, Robert soon collected himself and provided an explanation. He claimed that he had created the account to help Justice feel better about herself because she was the new girl in town and at school and might value the praise from a young man who seemed attractive. As was previously mentioned, Justice was new to the area, but she had already assimilated into her school community and made a lot of friends. But her behavior had changed recently. According to those close to her, the formerly upbeat and carefree teen had grown more tense and anxious. She frequently stayed over at her best friend Rochelle's house, but she kept the reasons for this change a secret. Though she never told Rochelle what was bothering her, Justice spent so much time there that it seemed like she had moved in. Rochelle claimed that Justice's stepfather had visited her home multiple times to collect her and take her home. Every time, Justice would attempt to avoid going with him and appeared clearly anxious. She would call her mom and beg to stay at Rochelle's for a couple more nights, pledging to finish all of her chores and concentrate on her studies in return. Danielle frequently complied with these demands. It was well known among her friends that Robert and Justice had a tense relationship from the beginning. But Justice never charged him with being aggressive or acting inappropriately. Additionally, nobody in her immediate vicinity, including her mother, had ever noticed anything that appeared inappropriate in Robert's interactions with his stepdaughter. Robert Kern emerged as the sole suspect in the investigation into Justice's untimely death as suspicions about him grew. Police investigated his background and way of life while holding him for additional interrogation. Robert, 43, had a lengthy criminal record that included convictions for physical altercations, possession of illegal substances, and burglary. It had been almost impossible for him to find steady work because of his criminal record. He took on odd jobs to make ends meet and occasionally worked illegally as a carpenter at a nearby sawmill. Now, investigators were trying to piece together Robert's dubious past, his actions toward Justice, and the circumstances leading up to the horrifying crime. Danielle was unaware that she was living with a man who had a criminal past because Robert had taken great care to hide it from everyone around him. She was shocked and eventually spoke up when investigators told her the truth about him. Despite Justice's protests, Danielle acknowledged that Robert had offered to drive her to school that day. Danielle became concerned when Justice failed to come home, but Robert reassured her that Justice was staying overnight at her friend Rochelle's house. He even prohibited her from contacting Rochelle or the police. After looking through Robert's devices, investigators found that Justice had been regularly looking up information about drugs that could make someone unconscious or immobile online in the months before his disappearance. Additionally, he had investigated buying such drugs on the dark web, and it seemed he had been successful. That wasn't all, though. Additionally, Robert had investigated methods of removing DNA from a body, concentrating on common household chemicals like bleach and disinfectants. He had even looked at satellite images of the wooded areas in the area, especially the DeLand outskirts, where Justice's body was eventually discovered. It became evident that Robert had spent months carefully preparing to commit his crime, dispose of the body, and remove any evidence. From the start, his motivation appeared to be clear. Robert had become unnecessarily fixated on Justice and understood that using force was the only way to fulfill his perverted impulses. He had made the decision to eradicate her completely in order to escape legal repercussions for his actions. When investigators examined the geolocation data from Robert's phone that day, They were able to eliminate any remaining doubts regarding his involvement. Together with Justice, he had driven away from their house toward her school before turning suddenly and coming to a stop in a remote location. Robert most likely turned off Justice's phone at this point and rendered her unconscious with a chemical, most likely chloroform. But he neglected to turn off his own gadget, which later recorded his movements. After being tracked toward DeLand, Robert's car came to a halt for about an hour. He would have had enough time during this period to attack Justice, cause her physical harm, strangle her to death, and conceal her body in the woods. In order to destroy any possible evidence, he poured a tiny bottle of a chlorine-based substance over her face and other parts of her body that day. But Robert started to worry that he might have left traces. He brought a big container of bleach back to the scene 2 days later. In a last effort to eliminate any last traces of Justice's involvement in the crime, he then liberally doused Justice's head, chest, and lower body with the chemical. The jogger later found Justice's body and reported it to the police after spotting the attacker when he returned to the crime scene for the second time that morning. Kern's alibi, meanwhile, was soon discredited. Unofficially working at a nearby sawmill, he had asked 2 co-workers to attest that he was on time that day, despite being almost 2 hours late. After being cautioned that they might be charged with perjury and hiding evidence of a violent crime, both witnesses eventually confessed to the truth when pressed further. Despite Robert Kern's denial of all charges, the case proceeded to trial due to the overwhelming evidence against him. According to witness testimony, Justice spent the final months of her life avoiding her home as much as possible because she was constantly afraid. But she never talked to anyone about her worries, not even her mother. Danielle never asked Kern about his past because she was too enamored with her new partner to notice what was going on around her. Kern's claims were methodically refuted by prosecutors, who demonstrated that he had carefully planned this horrible deed with the express purpose of ensuring Justice wouldn't live. Kern was further connected to the crime scene when particles found on his car mats were matched to moss and soil samples from the location where Justice's body was found. However, the corrosive chemical Kern used had eaten away at the victim's remains down to the bone, destroying all DNA evidence and tissue samples, making it impossible to prove the claims of an intimate assault. Nearly 2.5 years after the crime, in August 2022, Kern was found guilty of premeditated violent murder. He will never be freed because he was given a life sentence without the chance of parole. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is the story of a murderer who avoided punishment for years, despite numerous facts pointing to his involvement in a small town. A 13-year-old girl vanished, and it was not discovered until 24 hours later. This case remained unsolved for over 10 years, and it was finally resolved in the summer of 2021. In this video, we'll explain what happened to Haley Dunn. This story was set in the American town of Colorado City, Texas. This location is typical of low-rise America, covering 14 square kilometers. On Christmas Day 2010, the town had a New Year's vibe. Haley Dunn, a 13-year-old girl living with her mother Billy, boyfriend Sean, and older brother David, had a happy Christmas. Her mother divorced her father, Clint, when she was 10 years old, but they never stopped communicating. Her father lived across the street from Haley's house. On December 26th, the girl spent the majority of Christmas at her father's house, unwrapping presents before returning home to play video games and go to bed. The following day, her stepfather and mother went to work as usual. Billy left her cell phone at home so that the kids could reach her. Before leaving, she peeked into her daughter's room while she was still sleeping. Sean worked in another town, about a half-hour drive away. According to him, he had an argument with his boss that day, which led to him being fired and leaving work only 10 minutes after arriving. He then drove to his mother's house, where he spent some time before returning to Colorado City around 3 p.m. Sean went to pick up Billy from work that evening. When they arrived home, Billy noticed that her daughter was not there. Sean informed her that the girl had gone to her father's house and planned to spend the night at a friend's house. Haley frequently stayed overnight at friends' houses, so her mother took this information calmly. Small towns like this often have the illusion of safety, so parents are less worried about their child's safety. On December 28th, Haley did not return home. She went door to door, but no one saw the girl that day. Billy went to the police around 2 p.m., but they chose the easiest route. The police's main theory was that she had fled from home, which initially hampered the investigation. A voluntary escape is not investigated to the same extent as a missing minor. They searched Billy and Clint's houses and brought search dogs to the scene. The next day, they followed Haley's trail from the house to a nearby motel. It was extremely strange. None of the motel employees had seen this girl. She was not captured on any security cameras, and a thorough search of the premises yielded no results. Trained dogs pointed to a motel, but the girl apparently never arrived. As word of Haley's disappearance spread throughout the city, dozens of concerned citizens joined the search. Some looked around the area, while others printed and distributed flyers. And now we come to another strange moment. Clint, the girl's father, almost never left the street. He looked in every corner, nook and cranny, including dumpsters. He said he couldn't sit at home and wait. Meanwhile, Billy and Sean were less enthusiastic. The mother distributed flyers but refused to go around the neighborhood looking for her daughter. She stated that searching gave her the impression that they were already looking for her body, and that there was no hope of finding the girl alive. Sean didn't participate at all, which isn't the strangest thing. Billy and Sean hosted a New Year's Eve party on December 31st, 4 days after the girl had gone missing. They had friends over to listen to music, drink, and party. Without a trace seemed completely absurd. On January 3rd, a week after Haley vanished, the police officially declared her missing. This meant that more serious agencies, such as the FBI and the Texas Rangers, could become involved, and representatives from both arrived in Colorado City and began their investigation. Volunteers continued to search the area, and over 100 billboards about the missing girl were posted across Texas and beyond. Detectives completely ruled out the possibility of an escape. For one reason, they couldn't figure out why Haley would choose to take such a step the day before her disappearance. She had been in a good mood, and for the rest of the time, the girl showed no signs of a desire to flee. Second, all of her belongings were left in the room. If the girl had decided to flee, she would have taken something with her. The detectives quickly realized they needed to look closer at Billy and Sean. Their passive response to the girl's search and the New Year's Eve party made one wonder if they cared about Haley. The detectives discovered that on December 27th, the same day Haley allegedly spent the night at a friend's house, Sean and Billy drew $140 from their bank cards. They admitted that the money was used to buy illegal substances, which the couple consumed that evening while their children were away. Billy failed on 2 attempts. During the first interrogation, she was under the influence of drugs, and the second result revealed she was lying. Sean failed 2 interrogations and walked away before answering the third. Billy suspected Sean was involved in her daughter's disappearance and demanded that he leave her home. On January 12th, police officially announced that Sean was being treated as a suspect. Several factors contributed to this conclusion, including the couple's strained relationship. The police examined Sean's phone's geolocation data and discovered that his account of the day Haley disappeared did not match reality. He did arrive at work and stayed for 10 minutes before returning to Colorado City to Billy's house. It wasn't until later that he drove to his mother's house. It's worth noting that the police tracked the phone's location. The girl repeatedly mentioned being afraid of Sean. Haley told her best friend that she preferred to spend time outside or at friends' houses because she didn't feel safe with Sean. She once told her grandmother that she often saw Sean standing in front of her bedroom door in the middle of the night, and she was afraid he would come in. The police soon became aware of a conversation with Haley's uncle about the girl's disappearance. Her uncle said roughly the following: "I can't believe anyone would harm a child." Sean's response was extremely unusual. He compared it to killing a deer with all of this information in hand. The detectives concluded that Haley did not come from a wealthy family. Her mother and stepfather frequently drank and used illegal drugs, and Sean's behavior at parties appeared suspicious, but there was no direct evidence against him. Finally, the police contacted child welfare, who decided to remove Haley's older brother. On February 24th, police searched Sean and Billy's home, as well as his mother's. A massive discovery awaited them. They discovered over 100,000 obscene images of minors on a removable drive and a hard drive. The police also seized his laptop, but did not appear to have time to examine its contents. Sean's father arrived at the station and demanded his son's equipment back. It's unclear why the police did, but that's not the most interesting part. Sean received no punishment for having so much illegal content on his computer. On March 17th, police officers visited Billy's house to question Sean. A woman opened the door and said he wasn't home, but the officer showed her a pre-arranged warrant and entered the house, discovering Sean hiding there for concealing a suspect. Billy received 90 days in jail and a year in corrections. She was transferred to a Travis County Correctional Facility. Following her release, she remained in the area with Sean in 2012, however. The couple eventually split. Billy suspected Sean was involved in her daughter's disappearance, but the case had stalled due to a lack of new evidence and volunteers' inability to identify the girl. On March 16, 2013, a hiker discovered human remains near Lake J.B. Thomas in Scary County. Experts conducted tests and determined that the remains belonged to Haley Dunn, whose body was approximately 20 miles away from her home. However, they had circumstantial evidence that the girl's body had been discovered only a few miles from Sean's mother's house, which matched the geolocation data on his phone as determined by the towers. Given the short distance, Sean could have easily left the body in that location without anyone knowing. Furthermore, he grew up in the area and was well versed in where to hide the body, but investigators were unable to uncover any additional clues, and the case was refrozen for several years. Despite this, the girl's family had to wait 4 years to bury her body. A memorial service was held in January 2017. In 2018, Haley's father, Clint, stated that he believed Sean and Billy were guilty and his version, his mother, either helped conceal the truth or was directly involved in the murder. During the same year, he began conducting numerous interviews and attempted to actively publicize the case. The man stated that in the early years of the investigation, he tried not to bother the police with constant questions, but his patience had run out. The detectives did little to investigate, and his last hope was to spread the word widely in an attempt to bring the perpetrators to justice, which paid off. In 2019, an unknown person wrote to Clint, informing him that in 2011, he discovered several items that could have belonged to Haley. This person was in high school at the time and had not heard about the missing girl, so he did not consider reporting his find to the police. True information about the items has yet to be revealed, and the police have not stated what they are. Clint only mentioned that they were discovered in an area that had been thoroughly searched by volunteers and police. Later, new information emerged. Private investigator Erica Moore, who was handling the Haley case and kept in touch with Clint, revealed some disturbing information about Sean. In October 2019, she began receiving messages from various women in Texas, all of whom claimed they were being aggressively harassed online by a man named Casey. Not only was he harassing them with lewd messages, but he was also sending them explicit photos and videos of himself, as Sean shared a middle name. Erica asked the women to send her photos and videos of the man sending the girls, and her theory was confirmed to be correct. She persuaded one woman to go to the police station and report Sean, but they refused to press charges and even accused her of falsifying the facts. Erica believed Sean was responsible for Haley's death and planned to arrest him for stalking women on the internet. However, the case remained quiet until May 2021 when Erica and Clint were summoned to the district attorney's office for an urgent meeting. Police arrested Sean and charged him with Haley's murder. He is currently in Vail, awaiting trial on $20 million bail, but police have yet to reveal what new evidence led them to make this arrest. Apparently, this information will be kept secret until the trial. All we know now is that the police were granted permission to collect Sean's DNA sample shortly before his arrest. There may be a connection here to Haley's belongings, which were discovered in 2011. When Billy learned of her ex-boyfriend's arrest, she made a strange statement. She said she wasn't surprised Sean was involved in the murder, and she wanted to believe in his innocence until the very end. She also thanked God that the man would now be punished for his actions, which Billy had actively obstructed during the initial investigation while defending Sean. A date for the trial will be announced soon. At this point, it is difficult to predict whether a conviction will be obtained. It will be determined solely by the significance of the evidence, which police are now withholding in any case. Sean remained at large for over 10 years, despite the fact that all evidence pointed to his involvement in the murder. Haley's complaints to friends and relatives, the use of forbidden materials with children, and the man's constant lies during interrogations raised suspicions on all sides, as did Billy. She initially expressed no desire for justice for her daughter, Clint, but, unlike her, he worked hard and got his way. In one interview, Erica Moore hinted that the case would not have been solved without his participation. She did not provide any details, but we can recall the story of Haley's found objects. The person who discovered them only learned about the entire story through Clint's social media posts. More information about this case, including a court decision, will undoubtedly be released in the near future. Right now, all indications are that Sean will be convicted, and in Texas, that means only one thing: he will face the death penalty for his actions against the child. Unfortunately, there is no way this will help Haley Dunn live a long and happy life anymore. Please share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and thank you for watching. A 19-year-old woman was discovered dead in her own apartment. Investigators quickly discovered several disturbing facts, but they were unable to solve the case for several years before revealing the truth. Everyone was shocked and outraged by the unexpected outcome. Nona Dismayed was born December 26, 1985, in Russellville, Arkansas. She grew up in a large family with 4 brothers and 1 sister. When Nona was 10 years old, her father died. This event was a tragedy for the entire family, but they were about to receive an even more devastating shock. Later, the young woman told her mother that her father had repeatedly subjected her to violence. She was afraid to speak up while he was still alive, and her confession shocked her mother. Even after such a tragic experience, the woman had no idea what her husband was capable of. Nona found the strength to move on and eventually decided to assist other young women who had been victims of similar crimes. She joined a volunteer organization to help children in need during her school years. Nona started dating a guy named Kevin Jones. The young woman also competed in beauty contests and achieved significant success. Nona won several local contests, qualifying her to compete for the title of Miss Arkansas. In addition, the young woman was an active member of the local church and sang in the choir. When Nona was 19, she and her boyfriend enrolled in Arkansas, which launched an attack on a university in their hometown. The young woman decided to rent her own apartment because she wanted to start her own life. After her first year, her boyfriend changed his major and transferred to another university, which was an hour and a half away from their home. By then, the couple had been dating for about 5 years, and this was their first time living in different cities. Kevin returned home for the Christmas holiday. He stopped by Nona's apartment before driving to his parents' house, which was about 16 kilometers away from the city. The following day, they both had plans. Nona had to take her final 2 exams while also meeting with a young woman from the volunteer organization. Kevin planned to take his mother, a librarian, to a school event on December 15th, around 9 a.m. Nona messaged Kevin, wishing him a good day. He was expecting Nona to call him after her exams and tell him how they went, but she wasn't returning his calls or messages, so he became concerned around 6 p.m. While attending a school event with his mother, Kevin couldn't help but wonder why Nona hadn't answered her phone all day. Kevin eventually decided to call his friend, who worked as a pizza deliveryman in the neighborhood where Nona's apartment complex was located. Kevin asked him to come by and see if everything was fine. His friend arrived quickly and noticed that Nona's car was parked in the parking lot, and the lights in her apartment were turned on, but no one was answering the door. He told Kevin about it, and Kevin told his mother that he was worried about his girlfriend and wanted to go to her apartment to make sure everything was fine. The woman agreed, and they headed to the apartment complex together. Kevin's friend was waiting for them there, and the 3 of them began knocking on the door, but there was no response. Kevin had a key, but he left it at home that day because he had no intention of stopping by. A few minutes later, Kevin and his friend attempted to open the front door because they suspected something bad had happened to Nona, but they were unable to do so. Kevin then remembered that there were sliding glass doors in the back of the apartment. When he approached them, he immediately noticed something strange. Nona was concerned about her own safety, so she installed a special removable grill on the back glass door whenever she was alone at home. They are primarily used against burglars. They are simple to install and remove from within the home, but extremely difficult to do from the outside. But this time, there was no grill, and the doors were unlocked. When they entered the apartment, they noticed blood on the blinds and discovered a shocking sight in the bedroom. Nona was lying face down in a pool of blood, wearing only socks. Kevin rushed over to her and attempted to lift her, only to realize she was dead. Meanwhile, his mother contacted police investigators, who arrived at the apartment and began investigating the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the victim had been struck on the head several times with a table lamp found on the floor. Investigators discovered a bloody fingerprint on the table lamp, possibly left by the killer next to the victim's body. They also found an empty condom wrapper on the bedside table and no signs of forced entry. Medical examiners confirmed that the table lamp was used as a weapon, with the metal base matching. Experts suggest that the perpetrator may have used a condom found in the apartment, making it difficult to determine the presence of sexual violence. However, the crime scene was not thoroughly examined, with investigators failing to collect blood samples from the blinds on the back door or search for shoe prints in the apartment, which could have been used. When he entered the apartment and ran to her, he tried to lift her up, and upon realizing that she was dead, he hugged and held her. The police found this behavior strange and suspected that Kevin had done it deliberately by hugging the victim and getting covered in her blood he may have destroyed. Potential evidence and compromised the crime scene. Why it would be difficult for investigators to prove his guilt. For example, if Kevin's clothes or nails were found with the victim's blood, it could easily be explained that he hugged the victim after discovering her body. Another suspicious moment was that Kevin went to check on his girlfriend not alone but with his mother, and he also invited his friend to the apartment. Investigators believed that this way he secured 2 witnesses who found the body with him and saw him covered in blood. The police talked to Kevin for a long time right outside Nona's apartment, and from their questions the young man realized that they considered him a suspect. Then he said something that strengthened the investigators' conviction that he was the murderer, recognizing that he was suspected. Kevin began arguing with the investigators, stating that he constantly watches Law and Order and is aware that they are attempting to convict him. These words also appear strange to the police. In addition, they discovered that the key to Nona's apartment was only with 3 people: the girlfriend, her mother, and Kevin. Given the lack of evidence of a break-in, they assumed the man used his copy of the key to enter the apartment. Kevin was interrogated at the police station for several hours. During the interrogation, he told investigators his version of events and insisted he had nothing to do with the murder. However, investigators directly accused him of the murder and urged him to confess. Around 4 p.m., after numerous attempts to call his girlfriend, Kevin sent a message asking if she was still alive, despite the fact that Nona had already died. When the police left the interrogation room and left Kevin alone, he stood up and began punching the back of the chair for the investigators. This became another indication that the young man was violent and capable of murder. However, the police found no evidence linking Kevin to the murder. Medical experts discovered that Nona attempted to defend herself, which would have resulted in bruises and scratches on the killer's body, but none were found on Kevin. Despite this, the detectives remained convinced he was guilty and attempted to gather evidence. After interviewing over 50 people, the police were unable to find any witnesses. However, after speaking with known friends, they discovered that shortly before her death, she had begun seeing another man secretly from Kevin. Investigators immediately checked this person, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the murder, which raised suspicions about Kevin. She was killed with extreme cruelty, which in most similar cases indicates the killer's strong personal animosity toward the victim. A few days later, Kevin agreed to take a polygraph test. The operator concluded that the young man provided numerous false answers, and one of the investigators claimed that this was the worst polygraph result he had ever seen in his 28 years of experience. However, there is one caveat: the person who read the device's readings was not a certified specialist. He was simply a police officer who had not received the necessary training to work with this device, which did not bother the detectives. Following the interrogation, they increased the pressure on Kevin, attempting to force a confession. They claimed that all his acquaintances and relatives already knew that he killed Nona. The police really told everyone that Kevin's guilt was practically proven, and that he would soon be arrested. They convinced the victim's parents that he was the one who killed their daughter, although they refused to believe it. Until the end, the day before the funeral, a farewell ceremony was supposed to take place in the church, and Kevin had been helping to organize it since early in the morning. Later on, detectives called him in for questioning again, promising to release him before the start of the ceremony. In the end, Kevin spent 7 hours at the police station and missed the ceremony. Nobody present knew he was being questioned, so many assumed that Kevin didn't show up due to guilt over what had happened. Nona's parents didn't even want him to come to the funeral, as investigators had already convinced them of his involvement in the murder. But Kevin still came and sat far away from her relatives. After examining evidence from the victim's apartment, experts discovered a fingerprint on the light bulb in the desk lamp. The fingerprint was left by blood, indicating that it could only have been made during or after the murder. Despite this, investigators continued to search for Kevin for months. This request was granted, and the trial began in a different city. The defense called a witness who provided Kevin with a solid alibi. A plumber had visited his parents' house that morning and saw him around 10:30 a.m. The prosecution insisted that Kevin had time to go to Nonda's and commit the murder because, according to medical experts, she died between 10:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. They also shared an interesting fact. Kevin had turned off his phone between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., which coincided with the victim's murder. Furthermore, data from Kevin's phone revealed that he only began calling his girlfriend at 4 p.m., despite claims during questioning that he had been trying to reach her all day. However, at the time, the young man may have meant both calls and messages. Lawyers presented 2 additional witnesses, both of whom testified that Kevin did not commit the murder. One of them was Kevin's grandmother, who stated that on that particular day, she saw her grandson near the gas station and gave him money to go have a snack at a cafe. Another witness saw the man between 12:30 and 1 p.m. at the restaurant, and the establishment's cameras captured him eating lunch. As a result, the young man could not have committed the murder while simultaneously returning in time. Lawyers also questioned the possibility that Kevin left a bloody fingerprint on the lamp during the murder. In that case, when the body was discovered, the blood should have dried up. Experts who came to the apartment that evening wrote in the report that the bloody fingerprint was slightly damp, confirming that Kevin could have left it accidentally when he found Nona's body with his mother and friend. However, fingerprints were also found on the table lamp that was used to hit the victim, but they did not belong to Kevin. He determined that after death, the victim's body lay on her back for some time before being turned face down. This could imply that the young woman is still subjected to violence. The expert confirmed that he found no direct evidence of this, but added that he could not rule out such a possibility. The prosecution claimed that no fingerprints or DNA were found on the empty contraceptive package found next to the victim's body. However, a retest revealed male DNA, which did not belong to Kevin and did not match any databases. The trial lasted over a year and was concluded by the jury in July 2007. And now that he had avoided punishment despite their client's acquittal, the legal team promised to keep working on the case and find the true killer. Given the police's obsession with Kevin, no one expected them to finally do their job correctly. The lawyers first extracted DNA from the contraceptive packaging. Compared to all the men who knew Nona, all of these people volunteered to provide samples, and none of them matched. This went on for 2 months until an unexpected event occurred in September 2007. When the police arrested Gary Dunn for robbery, things became more interesting. First, this man had previously been convicted of assaulting another woman. Second, he lived in the same housing complex as Nona. In the early stages of the investigation, the police considered Gary as a suspect but quickly switched their focus to Kevin as the killer. The boy's lawyers requested a DNA test, which revealed that a sample from the contraceptive packaging matched Gary's DNA. After the young woman's murder, investigators even questioned Gary using a polygraph. Gary did go shopping with his mother, just not at the time of the murder, but 2 days before, as evidenced by receipts with purchase dates, which Gary even showed to the police, but they simply ignored such important information. They noticed that the dates on the checks did not match the day of the murder. This was stated in the reports, but for unknown reasons, they either ignored it or failed to notice that the days did not match. Finally, experts compared his fingerprints to those of unknown table lamps, and they matched. However, a serious issue arose here. The fingerprints and DNA matched, but not completely. The judicial system follows certain guidelines. In Gary's case, the necessary coincidence indicators for determining guilt were insufficient, despite the fact that the DNA and fingerprints were unlikely to belong to someone else. The investigators were likely guilty because they did not thoroughly examine all available evidence immediately after the murder, as required by the rules. It is possible that the DNA samples deteriorated. He was on parole in 2002. He attacked a woman who was running in the park, knocked her down, and began beating her, threatening to kill her. The woman escaped and ran to her car. Meanwhile, Gary fled the scene but was quickly apprehended. The man served 19 months in prison and was released early. Interestingly, his DNA sample was not included in the database. Gary's trial began in April 2010, and there were plenty of surprises in store for everyone. His own wife testified against him, claiming he was an aggressive and dangerous man. Gary frequently raised his hand against her, and the woman was terrified for her life, so she was afraid to leave him. But the most intriguing detail was that, a few weeks before the victim's death, she noticed her husband spying on Nona through her apartment window. Based on this, the prosecution assumed that the man planned the attack because of his criminal history. Gary had a history of violence, and he may have been keeping a close eye on Nona because she lived only a few meters away. On December 15th, he decided to act. He allegedly knocked on her apartment door and entered under false pretenses, grabbing the table lamp and striking her several times before assaulting and killing her, because Gary used contraception. Medical experts were unable to definitively state whether the victim had been sexually assaulted, but all evidence pointed to it. Gary's lawyers denied his involvement, but he had no real alibi, so they concentrated on blaming Kevin, according to the lawyers. Kevin discovered that the young woman was cheating on him and killed her. Kevin had to testify in court and listen as they attempted to portray him as the true criminal. The prosecution was unable to use Gary's fingerprints or DNA as evidence, resulting in a mistrial. A new trial was soon held, with a key difference being testimony from a woman who Gary nearly killed in 2002. The woman described how the man attacked her and how she barely escaped. Despite this, the second trial was declared a mistrial. First, he tried to kidnap a woman from a church parking lot, but she fought him back. A few hours later, Gary stripped in front of another woman in a mall parking lot and was quickly arrested. Given his criminal record, and the fact that he is practically Nona's killer, the court decided to sentence him to the maximum term. Gary was sentenced to 15 years in prison for 2 incidents and is still serving his sentence. Despite his right to petition for early release, authorities are unlikely to grant him such an opportunity. They also have the right to charge him with murder for the 3rd time, but they are not rushing to do so. The likelihood of the new trial ending in the same way as the previous 2 is high, so investigators are gathering more information. During the trial preparation, Kevin discovered that Gary's polygraph test results revealed lies, but investigators did not consider him a suspect. Unfortunately, his lawsuit was dismissed due to the statute of limitations. As a result, negligent police officers did not face any consequences for allowing the real killer to roam free for years and may not be punished in the future. Please leave your thoughts on this story in the comments, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Many people can get to the point where they suspect a loved one of betraying them. Others may give in to the influence of fantasies of retaliation against the betrayer, while others may decide to end the relationship due to such suspicions. However, what if a katana were to make these fantasies come true? The setting for this story was Camas, Washington, in 2018. The topic of discussion was a woman who lived in a nice home in a quiet neighborhood. Alex Lovell was the man's name. For 29-year-old Alex, playing video games was his main passion. He was in front of the computer for about 12 or 13 hours every day. Alex took his pastimes so seriously that he routinely performed shoulder, wrist, and hand exercises. He even worked on a unique mouse control method to improve his efficiency as a gamer or player. At the age of 30, Alex's girlfriend Emily Javier was not pleased with his obsession. After 2 years of dating, the young couple noticed that Alex was spending more and more time playing games and having less time for her. Emily, of course, did not like this situation. When Alex made the decision to pursue a career in professional gaming, her patience reached a breaking point. Emily struggled to accept a gaming rival, even though she was somewhat comfortable sharing her boyfriend's gaming habits. When she found the Tinder dating app on Alex's phone, her resentment reached new heights. She became very suspicious of this. She therefore realized that Alex had found another girl when she saw red hairs in the shower and scratches on his back, even though her hair was then dyed green. Convinced that he would simply deny everything, Emily started to plot a retaliation that would enable her to permanently get rid of him, rather than confronting him head-on. She considered purchasing poison, getting a gun, or hiring a killer. No, she purchased a katana at a shopping center. That was the only thing she could think of right now, driven by anger. She therefore made the decision to give herself an additional week to polish her strategy. She entered the question, how to kill someone with a sword, into a search engine while she was at home with the katana. Not surprisingly, her question was answered in a rather direct manner. In order to start their last journey to the Hawaiian Islands with Alex, the girl bought plane tickets at the same time. She confessed that she was tired of life in 2 notes, one to her mother and the other to a close friend. She also wrote Alex a note, though it's unclear what it said and when he was meant to read it. At first, it seemed as though she wanted to do something to herself while on vacation. However, how did she intend to exact revenge on Alex? Kill him too? It's feasible, particularly considering that she could have brought the sword with her if she had checked it in with her bags, rather than bringing it on her person. One evening, though, Alex came home at about 9. He wanted to go to bed and hardly gave his girlfriend any attention. Emily became emotionally unstable as a result of this. She taped 2 additional knives to her side of the bed in case her sword plan didn't work, and she concealed the katana there because she felt she could no longer stand such treatment. She went back to her boyfriend after completing her preparations and offered him a drink to help him fall asleep more quickly while intoxicated. Emily hid the man's phone, which he would need to call for assistance after he fell asleep quickly. She illuminated his neck with the light from her own phone so she could see better and aim more precisely. Her hand went to the katana, but just as she was about to attack, she unintentionally struck Alex in the head with the katana's back, waking him up. An adrenaline rush helped Alex quickly regain his sense of direction and start using his hands and feet to block Emily's next blows. At last, he was able to hold her tightly. He exclaimed in his final moments that he loved her and was shocked that she was attempting to murder him. Alex was on the verge of fainting and begged her to call for assistance or he would perish. Emily, oddly enough, listened. A dispatcher received a call from a girl who was hysterical at 1:54 a.m. on March 3rd. She was yelling that her boyfriend had been hurt. When she inquired as to where the girl had hurt her boyfriend, Emily exclaimed, "Everywhere! Everywhere!" The dispatcher wanted to know where the knife was. The girl responded, shocked, that she had used a samurai sword to attack her boyfriend. The dispatcher advised her to bandage her boyfriend's wounds and asked her to go back to the bedroom where he was to see if he was still breathing. Emily, however, insisted that she couldn't go there because there was too much blood. She snapped back to reality and saw that her boyfriend was actually dying. She even considered the possibility that he was already dead. Officers soon showed up on the scene. Alex was curled up, covered in blood when they entered the bedroom. He had deep gashes on the left side of his head, neck, and torso, among other potentially fatal injuries. Emily had nearly severed 3 fingers on his hand, cut his legs, and broken his wrist. Emily was taken into custody without protest and with tears in her eyes. While Alex was taken to the hospital, she let the legal system take care of her. A $350,000 bail was set for her. Alex's body had 26 wounds, according to the doctors. 6 major surgeries were required for him. 45 of the 150 staples they applied to him were on his head alone. However, the medical staff miraculously succeeded in reattaching his fingers. He would undoubtedly need to see a physical therapist for a while, but the fact that he lived was more significant. Because of Emily's weapon choice, the ferocity with which she executed the attack, and Alex's incredible fortitude, this attack garnered a lot of attention in the US and made headlines in numerous media outlets. Even though he had a long recovery ahead of him, he maintained an exceptionally optimistic outlook. He amusingly posted a question on the internet a day after the attack, asking if anyone could split a picture of him and Emily together. Some of his remarks were repeated by the media, though it's unclear how he was able to take the attack so lightly. One example would be, "I'm really proud that I was beaten with a sword and by a girl, man. I must sacrifice it for her. I certainly took a lesson from this. There's no comparing the feeling of when I overpowered her, he continues. I've participated in sports, taken first place in major competitions, and more. I've performed snowboard tricks. This is superior. I believed it was right to defeat someone who was determined to do me harm. I had spent my entire life anticipating this. Alex credits his love of kung fu movies and his habit of competing against other gamers with helping him win. He says he never cheated on Emily, but acknowledges that he likely spent too much time in front of the monitor. He remarked, "I hardly had time for one girl, much less another." He simply was too worn out to give her the affection she so richly deserved. Tinder was on his phone, he clarified, but he hadn't used it since it became apparent that he and Emily were seriously dating. Alex even acknowledged that the exhaustion from playing video games all day was the reason for his low libido. This might have persuaded Emily that he no longer wanted her, but he says that numerous times before, even when another girl merely liked his picture on social media, she had falsely accused him of cheating. All of this is denied by Emily. Regarding the red hairs, they might have come from his dog's fur or his own beard. Emily found it challenging to defend herself in court. Everyone could see that this was a carefully considered and planned crime. Emily told police that she wanted to kill him for cheating. "That was my objective." She was convicted of attempting first-degree murder. Her sentence was lowered from a potential 20-year term to 19 years because of Alex's survival, her lack of prior convictions, and her own decision to call 911 for assistance. This result did not sit well with Alex's family. They felt that because she tried to kill their son, she should be punished more severely. Emily countered that because of her history of childhood trauma, which hindered her ability to form relationships, her sentence should be shortened. Although her psychologist acknowledged that she had PTSD, he said it had no bearing on the case. The judge ultimately decided that she should receive almost the maximum sentence because of the severity of the attack. She must also receive treatment for her aggression and mental health issues. She must pay $30,000 in reparations and is forbidden from getting in touch with Alex or his family. To help Alex recover, his gaming friends set up a crowdfunding page and raised thousands of dollars. He is presently recuperating and has largely resumed his regular activities. He says he hasn't spoken to Emily since the attack. When asked how he feels about her, he admits that she saved his life by calling 911, which is significant. But it's difficult to sum up his feelings for his ex-girlfriend in just 2 words. In any case, he thinks she needs significant assistance. "I didn't expect this, but something like this had to happen," he continues in his characteristically lighthearted tone. "She reached for the samurai sword because she obviously didn't want me to end up in the wrong hands." And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. We'll talk about what happened in Everett, Washington, on September 20, 2017 at 1:55 a.m., when multiple people called 911 after hearing loud explosions as soon as the police showed up. They discovered a horrifying image on the doorstep 10 minutes later. Directly outside the door was Alicia Canales McGuire, 24. Sadly, she had already passed away. Thanks to CCTV footage and social media, investigators were able to solve this tragic case. Alicia was born on October 29, 1992, in Mount Vernon, Washington, to Manuel and Michelle Canales. She spent a significant amount of her adult life working as a caregiver because she enjoyed caring for others and always wanted to assist everyone. Raised on a farm, Alicia began working at the age of 5. She frequently went back to assist on the family farm because she understood the importance of hard work. Alicia loved spending time with her family, and she saw and talked to them often, always remembering to say "I love you" when she said goodbye. She and her spouse, Bradley, resided in Bird's View. In July 2017, Alicia and Brad tied the knot in a stunning beach ceremony at Deception Pass. As a result, investigators quickly discovered that Alicia did not reside in the home where she passed away. It belonged to her sister, Amanda Canales, who shared it with her 3 kids. Amanda asked Alicia to watch her kids while she was away, because she had to travel to New York for work. Alicia was glad to assist because she loved her nephew and nieces. 2 months prior, she had tied the knot and was eager to begin a family of her own. One of the people who called 911 was the stay-in nanny who was in the house with her. When she went downstairs after hearing gunshots, she discovered Alicia motionless and lying at the front door. When the police officers got to the scene, they looked at the house first. They had to see if the criminal was inside. They made sure that the only people in the house were Amanda's kids and the nanny. By closely inspecting everything, the police began searching for evidence after the terrified kids were removed from the house. The house had a car parked in front of it. Beside it were shell casings. It indicated that the person who shot Alicia was standing close to the vehicle, just in front of the front door. The door frame was struck by several bullets. Just outside the door, Alicia was lying face down. It did not appear to be a robbery. The house was not a mess. Furthermore, it appeared that the criminal had not even gone inside the house. However, why and by whom would someone wish to kill Alicia? The detectives suspected that it was a case of mistaken identity after learning that it was her sister's home. The investigators questioned Amanda, who may have been the target, but she was in New York when the nanny, who was also present in the house when the crime was committed, relaxed. They inquired as to whether she knew who would want to harm her or if she saw the person who shot Alicia. The nanny claimed that when she heard gunfire, she was upstairs. She noticed that Alicia was motionless and face down on the floor when she looked down. She called 911 because she was afraid and didn't see the person who had shot Alicia, the nanny. As far as she was aware, she told investigators, Alicia and her husband Bradley got along well, but she provided the first important lead to the police. According to her, there were issues between Amanda, Alicia's sister, and her former spouse, Kevin Lewis. The detectives discovered from looking through the local sheriff's office reports that this was not the first time the police had been called to this address. Every incident had something to do with family disputes between Amanda and Kevin Lewis. The detectives were therefore intrigued by this version. Kevin Lewis lived in a different area of Everett, so they located his home address and went there before dawn to speak with him. It was dark in his home. During the conversation, Kevin answered the door when they knocked. "Talk to Lewis." "She should be home," he said in response to the officer's question about his ex-wife's whereabouts. He appeared to have just awoken. He was asked to tell the detectives where he had slept. He claimed that his mother and sister could verify that he had spent the entire night at home. When the detectives told him that there had been a shooting in the home where his children lived, he didn't inquire as to why they were there. It was odd that he didn't show any emotion. He should have inquired about his children's well-being as a parent, but he chose not to do so. Kevin looked shocked and said, "Really, that was the end of our conversation?" when the detectives informed him that Amanda had been out of town on business. While strolling down the street, the detectives noticed that 2 nearby homes had security cameras that they could use to verify Kevin Lewis's story. He said that instead of going out, he spent the entire night at home. However, after reviewing the video, the investigators discovered that approximately 40 minutes prior to the assault on Alicia, a car was pulling up alongside Kevin's driveway. Then someone who looked a lot like Kevin came out the front door, approached this car, and got in. The vehicle drove off a short while later. The quality of the recording prevented the police from conclusively identifying Kevin as the next victim. The footage was seen by the investigators from a different camera. Despite being able to examine the car more closely, they were unable to identify it. They could only make out that the car was light in color. About 20 minutes later, they saw the car return after fast-forwarding the recording. But they had one important detail to notice. This car's front right rim was different from the other 3. The front right rim was dark, while the other 3 were light. Kevin Lewis, who was in the first recording, got out of the car and went back to his house when the car came to a stop close to it. Approximately 20 minutes prior to the 911 calls regarding a shooting, this man, whoever he was, entered the house. The car then drove off and never came back. The drive from Kevin's house to Amanda's was 15 minutes. This could indicate that the car had enough time to reach Amanda's house, or it could indicate that the car was unrelated to the shooting. It was too soon to say. Amanda learned of her sister's passing. She was in New York a few hours later when their father called to inform them that Alicia had passed away. Alicia married, was content, and hoped to start a family of her own, but now her family had to grieve for her. Amanda said she had no doubt that her ex-husband Kevin was the one who shot Alicia when the investigators asked her if she believed he could have done it. Amanda Canales wasn't prepared to publicly acknowledge how toxic her relationship with her ex had been, even after her 8-year marriage ended. Despite having 3 young children, 2 girls and a boy, and spending 10 years with Kevin Lewis, Amanda had been extremely unhappy and continued to live in fear of him even after their June 2017 divorce. Amanda had been bruised by Lewis's previous physical abuse, and even after they had parted ways, he continued to threaten her. Amanda was granted full custody of their children in August 2017. Lewis was ordered to pay $800 a month in lieu of child support. For Amanda, it was a new beginning. As a single mother, she was grateful for the support she received from her family and concentrated on her home in Everett, Washington. Amanda was threatened by Kevin. He threatened to kill her. He had the training because he had served in the military. Although her sister passed away, Amanda thought she was the one who had been attacked. Rather, she even obtained a restraining order against Kevin, which he repeatedly broke. Amanda and their 3 kids were both terrified when he wandered outside her house and peered in the windows. Kevin was not charged by the police with any of the restraining order violations. Amanda was returning home late at night and parked in the driveway next to her house when she was brutally beaten as she got out of her car a few weeks prior to her sister's death. Someone attacked her as soon as she opened her car door. She didn't have time to see the attacker's face because everything happened so quickly, but given everything, she was certain that Kevin Lewis, 30, was responsible for Alicia Canales McGuire's death. The investigators thought he was planning to kill his ex-wife. At the time, Kevin was unaware that she was in New York. He was unaware that Alicia had been asked by Amanda to watch her kids while she was away. Today, though, this version contained an error. Kevin would have been at his house when the shooting occurred, if the man in the video was indeed him. He was also given an alibi by his mother and sister. As a result, the police kept looking into the incident and took into account various theories. After going back to Amanda's house to take another look at everything and analyzing the bullet trajectory, experts came to the conclusion that Alicia was shot while the door was partially open and that the shooter fired at least 7 shots that entered the house from the outside. According to the evidence found at the scene, someone fired a shot while standing next to the garage, then proceeded to the house's door and fired once more inside. Multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso were determined by the medical examiner to be the cause of Alicia's death. She was hit by 5 shots. There were gunpowder stippling injuries in 2 of the wounds. The last 2 gunshot wounds to the head were most likely the last 2 wounds administered, according to the medical examiner, who testified that he was unable to ascertain the order of the 5 shots. The 7 shell casings discovered at the crime scene were fired from the same firearm, the experts concluded. Alicia was shot at close range, resulting in head injuries. After examining this version, the investigators were unable to locate any proof to support this. Due to the rarity of this particular brand of shell casings, the police were also interested in the ones discovered at the crime scene. These casings were produced in Russia and sold under the Tulimo name. The investigators hoped to identify the seller of these cartridges and possibly the buyer because the brand was not very popular. The investigators found that this brand of cartridges was sold by Walmart. The crime scene was close to one of these shops. Walmart representatives informed the detectives that they had CCTV footage showing a man paying for 9mm Tulamo cartridges that he had recently purchased. The detectives went straight to Walmart to view the video. They thought Kevin Lewis might be the buyer when they made the recording on September 18, 2 days before Alicia passed away, but they were mistaken. The police now knew the identity of the man in the video, who wasn't Kevin, because he used a credit card to make the purchase. When the investigators looked into this man, they discovered no relationship to the nanny, Alicia Amanda, or Kevin Lewis. They now had to find fresh evidence. The investigators looked through every version that was available at the time before turning to Amanda for fresh details about Kevin. They had a good relationship at first, she said. Kevin was restrained in his behavior during the honeymoon. She didn't anticipate that he would start hitting her and grow more hostile over time. After their relationship ended, Amanda was granted full custody of the children, a restraining order was issued, and they got divorced. However, a distraught Amanda was aware that Alicia wasn't supposed to be killed in the shooting and thought it was a case of mistaken identity. She told police that Lewis had somehow planned the attack and that Kevin was home when it happened. The footage from the night of Alicia's death has been examined by the investigators once more. They saw something now that they had never seen before. The man who left his house, Kevin, can be seen approaching the car and settling into the back seat behind the driver in this grainy video. Why, though, did he not take the front passenger seat? As the investigators searched for a solution, they came to the conclusion that someone else was already occupying the front passenger seat. As a result, by the time the car arrived at Kevin Lewis's house, there were most likely 2 people inside, which may have been the reason he had to take the back seat. There was insufficient evidence for the police to connect Kevin to Alicia's demise. But after gathering proof of Kevin's assaults on his ex-wife Amanda, they detained him in November 2018 and gave him a 3-year prison sentence. In the meantime, Alicia's case was still unresolved over a year after her death. The only break in this case came in 2019 when a woman with crucial information called the police station. A girl from nearby Spokane who had attended a party and boasted about being hired to kill someone on York Road, the street where Alicia was shot, was the source of the detective's tip. Given that Spokane was roughly 5 hours away from Everett, the police were unsure of what to believe. According to the caller, she was at a party when a young woman walked in. Angelica is who she is. The latter boasted about her involvement in the crime with her boyfriend. This woman claims that Angelica stated that a person died as a result of being shot in the head. They were hired to shoot from around the corner by the children's father. Additionally, according to Angelica, they killed the wrong person. A case of mistaken identity was involved in the incident. The specifics of this case have never been made public by the police. Alicia's head injury was only known to the investigators and her family. Angelica's knowledge of numerous details about the crime piqued the police's interest as they searched for her. Her true name, Alexis Hale, was discovered by the investigators. On her social media, they discovered pictures of her brandishing a 9mm handgun. It might have been the crime's weapon. Additionally, there were multiple videos with a man in the background. It was Jaredon Phelps, Alexis's boyfriend. Alexis Hale shared a video taken through a car's windshield that examined the road signs the night before Alicia passed away. The investigators were able to pinpoint the precise location of the car at that time, which was roughly 10 minutes away from Kevin Lewis's home. A few hours after Alicia's passing, Jaredon Phelps boasted about a wad of cash in the video below. One of the 5 comments that the investigators saw on Phelps's social media photo was from his aunt. They identified his aunt as Kevin Lewis's mother after clicking on her social media profile. As it happened, Kevin's cousin was Jaredon Phelps. The police had good reason to make an arrest. Alexis Hale was the first to be placed in handcuffs. She screamed and claimed that because she was only 17 years old, the police were unable to arrest her. She demanded a lawyer because she understood why she had been arrested. Jaredon Phelps was taken into custody by the police in a different area of the city at the same time. Phelps and Hale had driven from Spokane to Everett to carry out the shooting, according to the investigators' phone records. Additionally, early on September 20, Lewis's neighbor's security footage captured someone getting into a car. At 1:13 a.m. EM, the man in the white top departed, and at 1:37 a.m. he returned. Following Alicia's passing, Lewis was wearing a white top when the police visited him. Alexis kept everything from the investigators. At the time, Kevin Lewis was serving a 3-year prison sentence for assaulting Amanda. As a result, the researchers were hoping that Phelps would provide some information. The investigators suspected it was Kevin Lewis, and now the police had a confession and the name of the man who hired Hale and Phelps. Phelps provided them with additional information about the crime when they brought him to the scene. Following Alicia Canales McGuire's death in September 2017, Kevin Lewis, who was already incarcerated on an unrelated charge, was charged with aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder in July 2020. At the age of 20, he entered a guilty plea to first-degree premeditated murder. He was given a 31-year prison sentence by the court. At age 18, Hale entered a guilty plea to the same charge and received a 15-year sentence. During the trial, Phelps testified that he had committed the crime for financial gain and to gain notoriety. Lewis gave Phelps money, which he used to purchase a Ferragamo belt buckle, Timberland boots, and some tattoos. He asserted that he had given his ex-girlfriend $200 after she obtained the pistol from a family member. Later that year, Lewis entered a not guilty plea and was put on trial by the prosecution. Claimed that in order to get his ex-wife out of the way, he had given $2,400 to his cousin and his girlfriend. Although he had made them into adolescent killers, Alicia had unintentionally opened the door in a tragic case of mistaken identity. Lewis gave Phelps an envelope of cash on the way back. Phelps said Lewis had led them to the house, but that he didn't know who the target was. Phelps and Hale dropped Lewis back at his house and then went back to the spot Lewis had indicated. After getting out of the car, the two headed for the house. Hale went to knock on the front door and Phelps stopped beside the garage. Hale left as soon as Alicia opened the front door, and Phelps fired the gun until it was empty. The gun's muzzle crossed the threshold as Phelps fired the first few shots from his position close to the garage, and the final two after approaching the front porch. The final two shots were directed at the head and neck region. Phelps and Hale returned in their vehicle because of a glove that might have been left at the scene. They turned around and departed when they saw police cars upon their return. After getting GPS directions, they returned to Spokane by car. The defense contended that Lewis had only said to move the target out of the way and had never used the word kill in his conversation with his cousin. However, the court was reminded by the prosecution of Kevin's violent past and his threats against Amanda. They claimed that power and control are at the heart of this case, and it was obvious what the goal was. Amanda described him as pure evil. He had played with their kids, who were in the house when she was supposed to die, she remembered incredulously. I assumed you loved them, but a person who truly cares for someone would never want to put them in danger or cause them any trauma. Did you care that they would have woken up to find their own mother dead, lying in a pool of blood, if it had been just me home that night? She asked. She also discussed finding her kids a safe place to live. She informed Louis that, in spite of all the harm you caused, they are recovering and moving on. In case you were wondering, they never inquire about or discuss you. The jury found Lewis guilty of first-degree murder in less than 3.5 hours after a 6-week trial in November 2021. In January 2022, 34 Kevin was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Records show that Lewis is still incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla County, where Judge Thompson also ordered him to have no contact with his former wife, his children, Phelps, or Hale for the remainder of his life. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. A freshman at a prestigious university vanished without a trace after a sporting event, leaving her car and keys in the parking lot. The police did not investigate the case, believing that the young woman had simply fled, but her parents and friends were aware that something terrible had occurred. The mystery remained unsolved for 12 years, and it wasn't until the end that the truth was revealed. Shannon Melinda was born on October 20th, 1974, in Miami, USA, and her parents welcomed a second daughter, Monique, 5 years later. From a young age, the girls were taught that their first priority should be to obtain a good education. This approach had a significant impact on Shannon. She excelled academically from the start of her school career while also making time for various clubs and sections, where she outperformed her peers in every way. Shannon made it clear in high school that she wanted to pursue a career in politics or law. She led the school debate club and, in her final year, even gave speeches in the United States. Congress and the General Assembly of the United Nations are part of special training programs. Following these events, she decided she wanted to work for the Supreme Court. To achieve this goal, she required a solid legal education. Shannon submitted applications to several of the country's top universities. Given her perfect grades and extracurricular accomplishments, all universities and colleges were eager to accept her, but she chose Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. In addition to being one of the top 20 universities in the country, Emory offered her a $15,000 annual grant for the first 4 years of study, which covered the majority of her tuition. She moved to Atlanta after graduation to pursue a degree in political science. The university made a strong impression on her. She quickly adjusted and made many friends. Shannon was able to find a part-time job despite receiving the grant. A few kilometers from her dorm was a softball field that needed employees, and her responsibilities included keeping track of the game's score. Shannon was forced to quit her job on March 26, 1994, due to an error made by her supervisor. That morning, another employee was supposed to keep score, but Shannon was accidentally added to the roster and agreed to work the game. Shannon arrived at the stadium around 8:40, and her shift ended 4 hours later. Usually after work, the young woman would stop at a nearby gas station to get a soda. That day she also left, but no one saw her again. The stadium management had expected her to return after halftime to turn in her scorecard, but she never did. Her friend and roommate, Athena, was the first to sound the alarm. Shannon's absence from her dorm in the evening initially alarmed her. She had no other place to sleep and was unlikely to stay with anyone after not waiting for her roommate. The next morning, Athena decided to call Shannon's parents and see if they had heard from her in the previous 24 hours. Shannon's parents were at work at the time, so Monique, her younger sister, answered the phone. Monique informed Athena that she hadn't spoken with Shannon in a few days and promised to ask their parents when they returned home. Athena became increasingly concerned and told two mutual friends about Shannon's disappearance. They decided to look for her on their own. They got into their car and drove around campus. They eventually made it to Shannon's stadium, where they were met with a disturbing discovery. As they approached the stadium, they noticed a gas station nearby and were surprised to see Shannon's car. Her parents gave her a black Nissan 280SX as a gift. When they arrived at the gas station, they found the car empty, with the keys in the ignition and the doors unlocked. Shannon would never leave her car in such a state, which added to their anxiety. Her friends called the police because they suspected something terrible had happened. Unfortunately, the officers who arrived did not take the situation seriously. They took a quick look at the car and determined there was no evidence of a possible crime. Because there was no blood or signs of a struggle, the officers told the friends not to worry. They did not even collect fingerprints from the steering wheel or doors. Furthermore, they asked Athena to drive the car to the university parking lot, which she did. The officers spoke with the gas station attendants, who confirmed seeing Shannon around noon the previous day, but saw nothing suspicious. Shannon had most likely fled at the age of 19, according to the official police version. The case was not treated seriously. Shannon's parents decided to travel to Atlanta right away to join the search for their daughter. When they discovered that the police were unwilling to investigate, they did everything they could to change the situation, and their efforts were successful. Shannon was accepted into a non-profit organization by former President Jimmy Carter as a result of her connections after speaking in Congress. Shannon's parents had brought her disappearance to his attention. Carter and Senator Bob Graham secured FBI involvement in the case. Shannon's parents flew to Atlanta and started looking for their daughter. With the assistance of other students, they printed and distributed thousands of flyers about Shannon's disappearance. Later, her father rented a billboard and announced a $10,000 reward for any information leading to Shannon's location. The young female detectives identified several suspects among Shannon's acquaintances, but were quickly convinced of their innocence. 3 days after Shannon vanished, something interesting occurred. An unidentified man called the police hotline number listed on the flyers to report Shannon's appearance. He stated that the reporters made a mistake when reporting on the young woman's disappearance. Shannon was said to be wearing green shorts on the day she went missing, but they were actually blue. Furthermore, the caller stated that he had Shannon and would keep her as long as he wanted. Despite this distressing call, law enforcement continued to believe Shannon had simply fled somewhere. This assumption persisted for several days until April 6th, when an unidentified man made a second call. This time, he called the university's counseling center to inform them that Shannon was at his residence and was fine. He promised to call later and demand her return. Finally, he stated that he would leave Shannon's ring for the police near where he was calling to confirm his statements. This time, the FBI quickly traced the call and discovered that it originated from a payphone near a Burger King restaurant in suburban Atlanta. When detectives arrived at the location, they discovered the ring in a cloth baggie wrapped in duct tape. Shannon's parents confirmed that the ring belonged to her. This news brought them relief because it gave them hope of seeing their daughter alive again. Since then, they had been waiting for the perpetrator to call back and make his demands. This event prompted law enforcement to reclassify the disappearance case as a kidnapping. The police department appointed a new lead detective, who immediately pointed out his predecessor's lack of professionalism. He said that almost all of their actions were flawed. They did not take Shannon's fingerprints and instead asked a stranger to drive her car to another location. They also did little or nothing to investigate the case, believing that the young woman had simply run away and would return shortly. With this in mind, the investigators decided to rework every possible lead from scratch. The first thing they looked for was the softball field where Shannon was last seen the day she vanished. The fact that the young woman had been missing for several weeks added to the confusion. In addition, a championship game was held on the field that day, bringing the total number of visitors and participants to over 100. The detectives attempted to question as many people as possible, urging them to recall any suspicious incidents during the game. To their surprise, many people shared the same story. The only oddity in that game was the referee's behavior. According to the players and stadium staff, he was extremely dismissive of his job and was constantly distracted, even during important events. Instead of doing his job, he kept trying to talk to Shannon and ask her out. The referee's name was Calvin Hinton, but he preferred the nickname Butch. The 33-year-old man worked as a mechanic for Delta Airlines and refereed matches as a hobby. He had a wife, taught Sunday school at the church, and appeared harmless. The detectives dug deeper and discovered that Butch had left the softball field around the same time as Shannon. After speaking with his co-workers, they discovered another strange detail the day before the game. He had asked the other umpires to fill in for him because he was supposed to have a date. They were all aware that Butch was married, but he explained that his wife was out of town for a few days. When all of his co-workers said no, he called his boss and requested to leave the game early, explaining that his brother's wife was in the hospital and they had no one to leave the children with. Butch returned to the stadium 2 hours after leaving, still wearing his officiating uniform. He went into the locker room, changed, and then left. 3 hours later, he returned to the stadium and was spotted by a colleague and asked what he was doing there. Butch explained that he had forgotten to deliver his paycheck to the accounting department, but he didn't have it with him. Furthermore, Butch asked his colleague if he had seen where his car was parked for a man who had just arrived at the stadium. That question seemed strange. Investigators questioned Butch, who denied any involvement in Shannon's disappearance. He said that after leaving the stadium, he went straight home. As proof, he showed detectives several outgoing phone calls made within 40 minutes of leaving the stadium. He agreed to a polygraph interview, but failed. Almost all of his answers were found to be false, but they were insufficient to warrant his arrest. It was, however, enough to obtain a search warrant for his home, which was conveniently located near the Burger King where the police discovered Shannon's ring. Detectives discovered 2 additional intriguing facts. His neighbors claimed he lit a fire in the early morning hours following Shannon's disappearance. Later, Butch called his father and requested a handsaw, claiming that a tree had fallen on his car. Detectives went to his house with their service dogs but found no evidence of Shannon's presence there. However, they noticed 3 areas with overgrown soil. When they dug them up, they discovered something extremely creepy. There were dozens of women's clothing and shoes beneath the ground, as well as a sleeping bag and softball field scorecards. Experts examined the excavated clothing, showed pictures to Shannon's parents, and determined that none of it belonged to the young woman. Butch admitted he had no idea where these items on his property came from. He assumed they were left by the previous owners of the house. In the end, the police were in a difficult situation. A number of facts pointed to Butch's involvement in Shannon's disappearance, but there was no direct evidence against him. They hoped that a more thorough examination of Shannon's vehicle would yield results, but they were out of luck. Because the police did not collect fingerprints or DNA samples on the first day of the investigation, the experts were unable to locate them. However, they came to an interesting conclusion: someone had thoroughly wiped down the car, erasing any potential traces. In an attempt to gather hard evidence against Butch, one of the detectives discovered an intriguing fact. He examined the bag containing Shannon's ring and discovered that such items are not made for retail sale. He contacted the manufacturer and discovered that Delta Airlines was the only buyer of such bags in Georgia. According to the company, mechanics used the bags to store small airplane parts. As we recall, Butch was a mechanic for that company. The detectives thoroughly examined everything and discovered another tiny clue. In Butch's car, they discovered a piece of the same duct tape used to wrap the pouch. On the tape itself, the experts discovered microscopic particles of the same metal. After analyzing its composition, they determined that this compound is only used in the aviation industry. Despite this, the case remained frozen for several months. The police and Shannon's parents were certain that Butch was responsible for the young woman's disappearance, but no one could prove it. All evidence was circumstantial. When the airline learned of the suspicions against him, they fired him immediately. Previously, he had managed to mockingly boast to his colleagues that he was a suspect in a kidnapping. After reviewing his background, investigators discovered Butch had a lengthy criminal history. They were unaware of this at the start of the investigation because advanced criminal databases did not exist in the 1990s. It turned out that he had committed his first crime while a minor. He worked part-time and one day went to his boss's house, where only his wife was present. Butch attempted to tie her up but failed. The woman persuaded him to leave by promising not to tell anyone, but she then called the police. Butch was arrested but, due to his age, was only ordered to receive involuntary psychiatric treatment, despite admitting to intending to abuse the woman. When he was in his 20s and married, he was arrested again for kidnapping a 14-year-old girl. He called his younger brother's ex-girlfriend and scheduled a meeting, assuring her that his brother would accompany him. However, he arrived alone and, claiming to have a gift from his brother, tied her hands and led her to his home, locking her in the basement. Butch's wife discovered the victim and contacted the police. The girl told investigators that Butch had molested her, but he only received a 4-year sentence. She also revealed disturbing information. Butch had threatened her with the same fate as 2 previous victims. Butch was released early, less than 2 years later, and remarried, his new wife unaware of his criminal history. The police suspected he had other victims whose remains were never discovered. Investigators were never able to charge Butch in Shannon's case, so they continued to search for evidence without success. Butch was released from prison in December 2003 after serving an 8.5-year sentence. During that time, police were unable to connect him to Shannon's kidnapping, but they struck lucky. Butch frequently hinted to his fellow inmates about his involvement in the case. Detectives interviewed about 10 inmates, and one, Adonis Cornwell, remembered Butch's late-night confession. Butch claimed that Shannon was killed by the demons inside him, not by him, and that her body would never be found because it had been scattered to the wind. This testimony, combined with previous circumstantial evidence, enabled investigators to take the case to trial. Butch was arrested in August 2004 and charged with kidnapping and murder. According to the investigation, Butch saw Shannon at a gas station and lured her into his car using false pretenses. He threatened her and drove to his home. He then returned to the stadium, parked Shannon's car at the gas station, left the keys in the ignition, wiped away the prints, and left. When he returned home, he most likely abused, killed, and disposed of Shannon's remains. Many questioned whether the court would convict Butch without a body. At the time, there had never been a case in Georgia where a person was convicted without a body. Investigators worked hard to get the most out of the circumstantial evidence. They even brought in inmates to testify on Butch's confessions. Despite this, Butch maintained his innocence. Following the trial, the jury was unable to decide. Butch was found guilty of murder after 3 days of deliberation. Consequently, the court sentenced him to life in prison. He was 43 years old at the time, and in theory he should have spent the rest of his life in prison. But there was one unsettling detail: the perpetrator was eligible for parole every 7 years under the statutes in effect at the time of the murder. Butch attempted to challenge the court's decision but was unsuccessful, and 2 years later, in 2006, something very unexpected happened. He decided to confess to the murder. His story was almost identical to the prosecution's. He saw Shannon in the parking lot and suggested she go to Burger King for a meal. Shannon agreed, so they drove there in his car. After lunch, they returned to the field, but Butch missed the right turn, came to a halt, and complained that his leg was cramping. He asked Shannon to drive and sat in the back seat. He pulled out a prepared knife and threatened to make the young woman drive to his house. He tied her up and told her he would not hurt her. Butch stated that all he wanted to do was sell her car and then let her go. She remained calm and did not attempt to scream or fight back. Butch returned to the stadium and drove Shannon's car to the gas station, leaving the keys inside. He did this in the hopes that someone would steal it, which would throw the cops off guard after thoroughly wiping the steering wheel and other areas where he might have left fingerprints. Butch returned home, abused the young woman, and then left for the movie theater with his nephews and their parents. Apparently, this family outing was planned as an alibi. When he returned home, he continued to abuse Shannon while repeatedly promising to let her go as soon as he sold her car. He then allegedly began to realize the gravity of his actions and attempted to figure out what to do next. He went to bed, awoke a few hours later, and began to panic. He then went down to Shannon's house, wrapped a tie around her neck, and strangled her. According to Butch, she was sleeping at the time, and everything happened quickly. Next, he spent hours debating what to do with the body. By morning, he had decided to burn it, so he started a large fire and added fuel before putting the body in. He changed his clothes and attended the church service. When he returned home, the fire had allegedly consumed all remains. The man claimed that the unbearable weight of guilt forced him to confess what he had done, but it was difficult to believe. First, he made 2 taunting phone calls to the police and the university, claiming Shannon was still alive after having already disposed of her body. Second, he intended to kidnap another woman, his wife's closest friend. That day, as soon as his wife left town, he called her and invited her over, claiming that he and his wife wanted to meet her, but the friend declined, saving her life. Knowing this, can we speak of Butch's remorse and guilt? In addition, he claimed that the fire reduced the body to ashes in a matter of hours, which appears impossible. The man stated that when he returned home from church, there was no trace of Shannon. He allegedly waited for the ashes to cool before gathering and dumping them on the railroad tracks. Most likely, he lied and needed to bury the remains, including the bones, somewhere. But why would he do this? Butch's only option was to realize he might never be released and play the remorse game. However, if he had pointed out where the body was buried, his sentence could have been altered, denying him the opportunity to petition for release. Despite the fact that experts discovered traces of fuel, he continued to insist that the fire in his house was caused by a broken vacuum. He is currently in prison, and his next petition for parole can be filed in 2025, when he will be 64 years old. Shannon's parents are still fighting to prevent his release. The only question that remains for investigators to this day is whose belongings were buried in Butch's backyard. Was he involved in the deaths of other young women? Possibly in the dozens? Please leave your thoughts on this story in the comments, and thank you for watching. A 24-year-old girl went missing from the store where she worked the evening shift. Police discovered traces of blood in the back room and signs of a struggle, but it was not a robbery. The unknown perpetrator had left a fully stocked cash register. A few days later, the girl's body was discovered 5 kilometers from the store. The investigation into this terrible case lasted nearly 25 years. Lisa Sievert's fate was unknown for nearly a quarter of a century. Lisa Marie Seeger was born March 24, 1968, in Holyoke, Massachusetts. She was raised in a close-knit family with 3 other children. Aside from her, they lived in a town called Agawam. The girl has always been interested in music and has learned to play a variety of instruments. She was even a part of the school music group. Lisa attended Westfield State University after graduating from high school and earned a teaching degree in 1990. As an intern, she works multiple shifts as a counselor at a children's camp, while also teaching Sunday school at her church. After that, she works as a teacher's aide at Agawam High School, where she previously studied. At 24 years old, she spent the majority of her time working with a group of special needs children. She understood her students better than any other teacher, and she was also very professional, ensuring that each of her students received the best education possible. She also worked part-time at a local card and gift shop. On Wednesday, April 15, 1992, she finished her school shift around 5:30 and went to the store, where she worked until 9 p.m. At around 5 p.m., her sister Lynn briefly joined her at work. Lisa recalled being in a good mood that evening, and nothing foretold trouble. The next morning, saleswoman Sophia Maynard arrived at the store and was scheduled to start her shift at 9 a.m. Lisa was surprised to find her car in the parking lot. It was unusual because the girl worked at school in the mornings and was not supposed to be in the store. Sophia thought Lisa might have been out for the morning shift due to the approaching Easter. They were planning to inflate balloons for sale for that holiday. Sophia walked in the store and called Lisa by name, but there was no response. When she approached the counter, she saw her things there, including her wallet and car keys. It all looked very strange, so if she decided to call the police, a squad arrived at the store and began their inspection. Everything seemed normal. A heel strike. Despite this, they were unable to locate any useful leads on the premises. It was soon discovered that Lisa had also failed to arrive at school this morning. The principal even called her mother to see if everything was fine, but she had no idea where her daughter was. Lisa's disappearance quickly spread throughout the small town, and within hours all of her friends, relatives, and acquaintances had joined the investigation. The police began by developing a robbery theory, which quickly fell apart. Nobody had touched the money in Lisa's cash register or wallet. All of the merchandise was also available. Detectives then began to reconstruct the chronology of events. That evening they learned that Lisa's sister had left the store at around 6 p.m. After talking to employees at neighboring stores, they obtained more information at about 7:20 p.m. Lisa spoke with the owner of the carpet store next door. They discussed a pressing problem with the local parking lot, which was being occupied by bowling alley customers. The owner told her that he himself would not risk voicing his displeasure with the drivers who parked in front of there. The door was open, but the clerk never emerged. The woman thought she heard noise in the back room, but she decided to leave. As a result, the police determined Lisa's disappearance occurred around 8:20 p.m. She served her final customer, and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were to figure out what had happened during those 40 minutes. The local investigators were assisted by the FBI and state police, who coordinated a massive surge. Foot squads searched the area surrounding the store from helicopters. The more distant terrain police dogs were also brought to the store in the hopes of tracking Lisa down. Unfortunately, none of this led to any results. Investigators concluded that Lisa had clearly not left the store of her own free will, so on April 17th, the head of the local police announced a reclassification of the case, which had previously been classified as a missing person case. 2 days after her disappearance, police were already looking into a kidnapping. On Sunday morning, April 19th, all local churches prayed that Lisa would be found alive and unharmed. It was Easter, but there was no holiday spirit whatsoever. At around 2 p.m., the police received a call. A man was walking his dog on the outskirts of town near Highway 75, walking along a wooden area when he noticed a woman's body and immediately contacted law enforcement. Officers arrived on the scene and identified Lisa Sievert. They found multiple wounds on her body from a sharp object. Later, medical experts determined that the girl had also been abused. Her body was about 5 kilometers from the store, which meant that the perpetrator most likely drove the girl here in a car. A farewell ceremony was held at the church where the girl taught on Sundays. It was attended by nearly 1,000 people. The residents of the small town, who were accustomed to a quiet and safe life, panicked. Many store owners eliminated single shifts, and employees walked each other to their cars. The self-defense sections became overcrowded in a matter of days. In addition, approximately 300 women applied for firearm ownership permits. The entire town feared that an unknown criminal would strike again. The police and FBI were working on the case almost all day and night. It soon became clear that they had obtained a DNA sample from the crime scene that could belong to the killer. They developed the theory that Lisa's boyfriend was involved, but he had an alibi and his DNA did not match the sample. They discovered that the girl's friends, coworkers, and relatives had all undergone DNA testing, but there were still no matches. The police also received numerous tips from local residents. Some reported seeing a suspicious car on the night of Lisa's murder, while others claimed to know the identity of the perpetrator. However, all of these leads led nowhere, and detectives sifted them from the tire tracks on the road near where the body was discovered. The police determined that they were abandoned by a van or large SUV. Detectives questioned all drivers of similar vehicles and were no closer to apprehending the perpetrator, but they did locate a witness who may have seen the same vehicle. At around 9:15 p.m., an employee from a store near Lisa's workplace drove home. Standing at a traffic light, she noticed a large SUV pull off the road and head toward the location where Lisa's body was later discovered. The woman was unable to describe the car in greater detail because it was dark outside. She only mentioned that she thought there were a man and a woman in the car. She also mentioned that when the car pulled onto the dirt road, the woman's head twitched unnaturally, as if she were asleep or unconscious. Because this information did not aid in the identification of the suspect, all leads have been exhausted. The police continued to investigate the case, but with each passing month, the prospect of solving this macabre mystery faded. It took 1.5 years before Lisa's family and friends were given another chance to discover the truth. In October 1993, national television aired an episode about the caves. The popular program aired stories about unsolved cases, which drew a lot of attention. This sometimes resulted in new witnesses for the police. The case got a second wind. Lisa's case was no exception. Within an hour of the broadcast, the police had received hundreds of calls from people with information. As is often the case, the majority of these leads led nowhere, but the police pursued each one thoroughly. The detectives stated that they had identified a few valuable leads, but did not specify which ones. Unfortunately, it did not go anywhere. The chances of solving the case decreased steadily over time. Lisa's family went to great lengths to ensure that her legacy was never forgotten. Although Lisa's teaching career was cut short early on, her relatives made significant contributions to the Agawam educational system in 1995. Lisa's parents donated $11,000 to the science division of the school where she worked. These funds were used to buy equipment and support genetics classes. The parents also established a fund to assist gifted students, which distributed approximately $35,000 in awards. Lisa was murdered 10 years ago. Her mother refused to give up hope that the case would ever be solved. She went to great lengths to honor her daughter's memory. Her mother participated in all interviews and answered reporters' questions. Every year, hundreds of people gathered to light candles in Lisa's memory. Meanwhile, police had only one piece of significant evidence in their possession: a DNA sample from the alleged killer. They kept cross-referencing it with known criminal databases, hoping that the right person would show up sooner or later, but it never happened. A new method of DNA phenotyping essence is as follows: using the information embedded in a person's DNA, experts determine the features of his appearance and construct an assumed portrait at the time. Specialists can use DNA to determine sex, approximate age, eye and hair color. The portrait created from this data is not always accurate, but the coincidence with a real person's face can be amazing. Experts presented 2 portraits of Lisa's alleged killer, aged 25 and 50, based on DNA evidence. When the police department posted these portraits, they received over 170 calls. These individuals reported seeing a similar man, but the majority of these leads also led nowhere. Only a year later, on September 18, 2017, police issued a high-profile announcement that the perpetrator had been apprehended. Gary Shara, 49, was the man who revealed himself. The news quickly went viral in the American media. When the police find the killer after a quarter of a century, it is extremely rare, so such stories immediately piqued the public's interest. Investigators revealed how they located Cher shortly after his arrest. It turned out that the man was considered a suspect in 1993, a year after Lisa was murdered. Remember the federal television program that prompted the police to receive hundreds of calls with potential leads? A lawyer from Seattle was among those who called in. He informed detectives that his client may have information about Lisa's murder. She was a woman in the process of divorcing her husband. They lived in the town of Long Meadow, which was near Agawam. According to the woman, her husband was paying more attention to Lisa Sievert's case. If this murder were on television, he would rush into the room and stare blankly at the screen, completely unresponsive to those around him. As you may have guessed, this man was Gary Shara. He was 24 years old at the time. He was in a very troubled marriage with a 1-year-old son. He and his wife were constantly fighting and had begun divorce proceedings shortly after their child's birth. According to the police statement, they developed a theory that Gary was involved in 1993, but found no evidence to back it up. On the contrary, using his ex-wife as a source of information raised concerns. The truth is that she suffered from a variety of mental disorders and had a long history of alcohol abuse. Furthermore, during their divorce, Gary obtained custody of their son through the courts, but his wife secretly relocated the child to another state. Another important point to note is that this was not the first time former or current wives had called the police, alleging that their husbands were involved in Lisa's murder. Surprisingly, there were many such calls, so the detectives assumed Gary's case was just one of them. However, they questioned him, and the man denied his involvement and refused to provide a DNA sample. Because no one could legally force him to provide a sample, the police were left with few options. Later, detectives compiled a list of all the men interviewed in the case who refused to provide a DNA sample. Gary was among them, and the police called him in for questioning several more times. During the third interview in 2008, it was apparent that Gary was trying not to touch anything, not even the table. He was offered a bottle of water, but he refused. He looked as if he had only one thing on his mind: how the cops wouldn't get his DNA sample. By 2017, detectives had a list of 11 suspects on their hands, including Gary. All of them had been interviewed at various stages of the investigation and refused to voluntarily submit to DNA testing. In fact, there were many more suspects on that list, but through DNA phenotyping, investigators were able to weed out unsuitable candidates. They did not match some of the characteristics that experts determined from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August 2017, detectives gathered all available information and went to court. They asked for an order compelling all the list members to provide DNA samples, and the court agreed. On September 13th of that same year, police went to Gary's apartment to notify him of this obligation, but the man was not home. The door was opened by his neighbor with whom they shared an apartment. The detectives left him their business card and asked him to give the information to Gary urgently. The very next day, something unexpected happened. Gary's current girlfriend came to the police station and reported that he had left 3 letters in her apartment. The researcher was surprised to find an apology to the secret family, as well as a detailed confession of Lisa's murder on 2 sheets. Gary wrote that he had violent and uncontrollable desires since childhood, and that evening he was obsessed with the idea of kidnapping and abuse. Gary, as he stated in a letter, allowed himself to do something horrible while driving past Lisa. The man stated that he did not intend to kill Lisa, but events allegedly spiraled out of his control. Gary stated that he wanted to surrender to the police hundreds of times but was unable to do so due to cowardice. He admitted to having suffered from self-loathing for many years. At the end of the letter, he stated his intention to commit suicide. Police immediately began looking for Gary, and his car was soon discovered in. Another suicide note was found on the windshield of a car in Stafford Springs Hospital parking lot. The man had ingested some powerful drugs, but he immediately got into his car and drove to the nearest hospital, where he was pumped out. When the doctors finished helping Gary, the police arrested him and took him to the station. At the same time, a judge issued a search warrant for both his and his girlfriend's apartments. The police discovered several objects containing his DNA. No one was surprised by the results of the analysis. It matched the killer's sample exactly, as well as several other potentially significant leads. Gary's wife, who had reported suspicions about him back in 1993, died in 2014. However, investigators discovered documents drafted by her lawyer in which the woman revealed numerous gruesome details. One day, Gary told her in plain language that he could not engage in intimacy with her unless he had a knife in his hand. The day after Lisa's murder, the woman called her sister and told her that Gary had come home late at night, was extremely disturbed, and his body was covered with scratches. He also gave his wife a music box and said that he had bought it at the very store where Lisa worked, except according to Gary himself, it was an older woman with gray hair who sold it to him. The problem is that no such employee has ever been there. It is not clear why all these details were not reported to the police in 1993, and it is impossible to find out now. While in custody, Gary suddenly proclaimed his innocence and refused to confess to what he had done. In all likelihood, he was driven by simple fear, but with that kind of evidence, there was no chance of getting away with it. The only thing he was able to achieve was a postponement of his sentence. The trial was not to begin until 2 years later, but Gary, who had been in a cell the whole time, suddenly decided to confess. On September 21, 2019, he appeared before a judge and pleaded guilty to the murder of Lisa Sievert. This charge qualified as first-degree murder, and in Massachusetts, a defendant on such a sentence faces life in prison without parole. Lisa's family was present in the courtroom. Her mother, who had waited 25 years to learn the truth, spoke. She thanked everyone involved in the investigation, as well as the ordinary concerned people who had been there for her family throughout. As a result, the killer went on to live the rest of his life. Despite taking a quarter of a century, One of the state's longest-running criminal cases was finally closed behind bars. The harsh reality in such a situation is anything but endless ignorance. Take care and thank you for watching.